get my daughter to the hospital now!
She entered the billionaire CEO's car by mistake with her sick daughter, not knowing he'd been searching for her for 5 years. Have you ever had that one night where everything that could go wrong did? When the person you used to be and the person you are now crash into each other in one brutal moment. Before we continue this powerful story, thank you for helping Mr. Steele Rich Stories pass 1,000 subscribers. If you love emotional, life-changing stories like this, please hit that share button right now so more people can find our channel and grow with this community. Welcome back, family. And if you're new here, this is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where every story entertains your heart and educates your soul. The rain hammered against Kenya Cole's shoulders like cold fists, each drop adding weight to her already heavy burden. Her 4-year-old daughter, Azariah, burned with fever in her arms, small chest rising and falling with labored breaths that sounded like sandpaper against wood. The emergency clinic was 20 minutes away, but it might as well have been on another planet without a ride. "Mama, it hurts," Azariah whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I know, baby. We're getting help right now." Kenya's voice stayed steady, despite the panic clawing at her throat. She'd called 3 rideshare services, but the storm had created surge pricing she couldn't afford and wait times that might cost her daughter's life. Tonight, Kenya isn't just racing the rain. She's racing her daughter's breathing and the ghost of the man who broke her heart 5 years ago, because the car she's about to climb into doesn't belong to a rideshare driver. It belongs to the billionaire CEO who's been searching for her without answers, and who has no idea he has a daughter. Through the sheets of rain, headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek sedan pulled up to the curb, its engine purring like an expensive secret. Kenya could barely see through the downpour, the world reduced to blurred shapes, and the desperate need to get Azariah to help. Her phone buzzed with a notification. "Your driver has arrived." "Thank God," she breathed, rushing toward the car. The back door opened from inside, someone reaching across to help. Kenya didn't hesitate. She slid into the warmth, cradling Azariah against her chest, water dripping from both of them onto leather seats. "Eastview Medical Center, please," Kenya said urgently, adjusting Azariah's position to help her breathe. The pediatric emergency entrance. "My daughter can't breathe properly." The interior welcomed them with warmth and the scent of expensive leather mixed with something else, a cologne that triggered a memory she'd buried 5 years deep. Kenya was so focused on Azariah that she didn't immediately register the passenger already occupying the back seat. "Kenya." Her name, spoken in a voice she'd tried to forget, hit her like lightning. Kenya's head snapped up. In the dim interior lighting, she saw him, the sharp jawline, the expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, those eyes that had once looked at her like she was his entire universe. Kendrick Vale. 5 years older, 5 years more successful, 5 years removed from the night he'd shattered her world. The CEO whose face graced business magazines, whose tech company had revolutionized secure communications, whose name she'd avoided searching online because seeing his success without her hurt too much. The man who didn't know he had a daughter struggling to breathe in her arms. Kendrick. His name came out strangled, barely a whisper, time compressed. 5 years of silence, 5 years of raising their daughter alone, 5 years of wondering what if. All of it crashed into this single moment in the back of a car that wasn't hers during a storm that wouldn't stop. Kenya's mind raced. This wasn't her rideshare. She'd climbed into the wrong car, his car. The universe's cruelest joke or its strangest mercy, she couldn't tell which. Azariah chose that moment to cough. A harsh barking sound that made both adults flinch. The little girl's breathing grew more ragged, each inhaling a visible struggle that pulled the skin between her ribs inward. Kenya's embarrassment and shock became irrelevant. Nothing mattered except the child in her arms who couldn't get enough air. "I'm sorry, this is a mistake." Kenya started already reaching for the door handle. "Wrong car. We'll wait for—" "Driver, Eastview Medical Center, pediatric emergency entrance. Now." Kendrick's voice cut through her apology like a blade through silk. Authoritative, final, the tone of a man used to being obeyed instantly. The car surged forward before Kenya could protest. "When did the fever start?" Kendrick asked, his analytical mind already processing the crisis with the same focus he brought to boardroom negotiations. Kenya's pride screamed at her to refuse his help, to demand the driver stop and let them out. But Azariah's wheezing was getting worse, and pride didn't help children breathe. "This afternoon," Kenya answered, her voice tight with fear she couldn't hide. "She was fine this morning, went to daycare, but they called me at work saying she had a fever. It spiked 2 hours ago. She's had breathing problems before, but never like this." The streetlights painted golden strips across Kendrick's face as they sped through rain-slicked streets. His eyes kept returning to Azariah, studying her features with an intensity that made Kenya's stomach twist. Could he see it? The way Azariah's nose curved exactly like his? The stubborn chin that jutted out even when she was sick? Those eyes that, when open, mirrored his own down to the unusual gold flecks around the iris? "How old is she?" The question landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. 4. Kenya kept her voice neutral, praying he wouldn't do the math, praying the darkness and Azariah's illness would distract him from the truth screaming from their daughter's DNA. The silence stretched, filled only by the rain drumming on the roof and Azariah's labored breathing. Kenya pulled her daughter closer, as if proximity could protect them both from questions she wasn't ready to answer. She was acutely aware of how she must look, soaked through in her grocery store uniform with the stain on the collar she hadn't been able to wash out, hair plastered to her face, a cheap phone with its cracked screen visible in her jacket pocket. The leather seat beneath her was probably worth more than everything she owned. This wasn't how she'd imagined seeing him again. In her rare fantasies, she'd been successful, polished, standing on equal ground. Not desperate and dripping in the back of his car, her daughter's illness the only thing keeping her from bolting. Kendrick's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap, the only outward sign of his inner turmoil. Kenya. Here. After 5 years of silence, 5 years of private investigators finding nothing, 5 years of wondering if he'd imagined the depth of what they'd shared. She looked different, thinner, with worry lines around her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and struggle. Her clothes were worn, practical, chosen for necessity rather than style. But she was still Kenya, still carrying herself with that fierce dignity he'd fallen in love with, still refusing to ask him for anything beyond this ride, even though she clearly needed so much more. Then his attention shifted fully to the child in her arms. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, struggling to breathe with a wheeze he could hear even over the storm. Kenya held her with practiced urgency. This wasn't the first medical crisis, wouldn't be the last. The protective way she cradled the child's head, the automatic adjustment to help her lungs expand, the whispered comfort. This was a mother who knew her child's needs intimately. But it was the child's features that made his breath catch. Even in distress, even with fever flushing her cheeks, the resemblance was there. The shape of her nose, the curve of her fingers where they gripped Kenya's shirt, that stubborn chin he saw in the mirror every morning. 4 years old, Kenya had disappeared 5 years ago. The math screamed at him, but he pushed the thought aside. Right now, a child, possibly his child, needed help. Everything else could wait. "Does she have any allergies?" Kendrick asked, his voice gentler now. "Any medications she's currently taking?" Kenya rattled off the list automatically. Albuterol, Montalou asked, a rescue inhaler they kept for emergencies. Medical terms that told him this child had chronic respiratory issues, that Kenya had become fluent in a language no parent wanted to learn. How often does this happen? Bad episodes like this? 3, maybe 4 times a year. Usually we catch it earlier, manage it at home. But tonight, Kenya's voice cracked. Tonight everything went wrong at once. The fever came on so fast and the rideshare apps kept crashing and I couldn't. She stopped herself, visibly pulling her composure back together. Showing weakness in front of him felt dangerous, like giving him ammunition she couldn't afford to lose. Kendrick leaned forward slightly, and Kenya caught a glimpse of the boy she'd loved underneath the polished CEO exterior. "You're doing everything right," he said quietly. "She's lucky to have you." The unexpected kindness nearly broke her. Kenya blinked hard, focusing on Azariah, refusing to let tears fall. She'd cried enough over Kendrick Vale. Tonight was about survival, not sentiment. The hospital's emergency entrance glowed through the rain like a lighthouse. The car pulled smoothly under the covered drop-off area, and Kendrick was out before it fully stopped, coming around to open Kenya's door. He offered his hand. Kenya hesitated, for just a heartbeat accepting help meant accepting him back into her orbit, even temporarily. But Azariah's breathing rattled in her chest and practicality won over pride. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and for one disorienting second, she was 21 again, feeling the universe shift when he'd first touched her in a campus corridor. Then Azariah coughed, and the moment shattered into present urgency. They moved through the automatic doors together, and the warmth of the hospital hit them after the cold rain. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright after the darkness outside. The antiseptic smell of illness and healing filled Kenya's nose. A nurse at the triage desk looked up immediately, her experienced eyes assessing the situation in seconds. Soaked woman, sick child, respiratory distress visible from across the room. "How can I help?" Nurse Jasmine Lee asked, already moving from behind her station, fingers reaching for a pediatric oxygen saturation monitor. 4 years old, high fever, respiratory distress with retractions, Kenya said, slipping into the clinical language she'd learned through necessity. History of reactive airway disease. She's been on continuous albuterol at home with no improvement. Jasmine's eyes flicked briefly to Kendrick, taking in his expensive suit, then back to Kenya's wet grocery store uniform. The unspoken question, "What's this picture?" remained professional and unasked. "Relationship to the patient?" Jasmine asked, fingers flying across the computer keyboard. "I'm her mother," Kenya said. "I'm family," Kendrick added before Kenya could stop him, the lie emerging smoothly, confidently. Kenya shot him a look half warning, half gratitude. Having someone with his presence and obvious resources might get Azariah seen faster, even if it meant complicating an already impossible situation. Jasmine didn't question it. "Let's get her back immediately. I'm paging the attending physician now." Within minutes, they were in a treatment room, and Azariah was surrounded by efficient medical professionals. A pulse oximeter clipped to a tiny finger displayed numbers that made Kenya's heart clench. 89% oxygen saturation, dangerously low for a child her age. An oxygen mask went over Azariah's face, and the little girl's eyes went wide with fear. "Mama." Her voice was muffled, small, terrified. "I'm right here, baby." Kenya moved close, taking Azariah's free hand. "These nice people are helping you breathe better, just like at home but with stronger medicine. Remember how the mask helps, just like we practiced." Dr. Elena Reyes entered, her movements economical and purposeful. She listened to Azariah's lungs, checked the monitors, asked rapid-fire questions that Kenya answered while Kendrick stood against the wall, watching everything with laser focus. "Severe asthma exacerbation, likely triggered by a respiratory infection, Dr. Reyes announced. We're starting continuous albuterol, and I want a chest x-ray to rule out pneumonia. If her oxygen saturation doesn't improve in the next hour, we'll need to consider admission. Admission? Kenya's voice went tight. Hospital stays meant bills she couldn't pay, missed work she couldn't afford. Let's see how she responds to treatment first, Dr. Reyes said, her tone reassuring. But I want to be prepared. Mum, you can stay with her during the nebulizer treatment. Dad, she glanced at Kendrick, we'll need you to wait in the family area while we do the x-ray. Neither Kenya nor Kendrick corrected her assumption about their relationship. I'll be right outside, Kendrick said, his eyes meeting Kenya's. So many things passed unspoken in that look. Questions about the past, about the child who looked like him, about why Kenya had disappeared without a trace. But also something simpler, a shared focus on the small person struggling to breathe, an unspoken agreement that everything else could wait until she was safe. Kenya nodded, unable to trust her voice. As the medical team prepared Azariah for her chest x-ray, as nurses attached monitors and adjusted oxygen flow, Kenya felt the weight of 5 years of secrets pressing against her chest like a physical force. In the next room, Kendrick was almost certainly doing the math, connecting dots, realizing truth she'd hidden. Her phone buzzed, a text from the rideshare service apologizing for the delay, saying her driver was still 10 minutes away. 10 minutes too late. Wrong car, right person, impossible timing. Kenya looked at her daughter, their daughter, and wondered how she was going to explain any of this. To Kendrick, who deserved answers, to Azariah, who deserved a father, to herself, who'd spent 5 years building walls that had just crumbled in the back of a car during a storm. "Mama, I'm scared," Azariah whispered behind the oxygen mask. "I know, sweet girl, but you're being so brave, the bravest girl I know." Through the treatment room's window, Kenya could see Kendrick in the waiting area, sitting perfectly still, his expensive suit still damp, his face a study in controlled emotion. Waiting, thinking, calculating. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. Neither did the one she could feel building inside these hospital walls. The university sprawled across 40 acres of possibility, its red brick buildings standing like promises against the September sky. Students rushed between classes, backpacks heavy with textbooks and dreams, while banners announcing club meetings and football games flapped in the autumn breeze. This was where futures were built, where connections were made, where some people came to polish their destinies and others came to forge them from nothing. Kenya Cole belonged to the second category. At 21, she moved through campus with the focused determination of someone who couldn't afford to fail. Her schedule was color-coded and memorized, classes from 8 to 3, tutoring from 4 to 6, night shifts at Rosie's Diner from 7 to 2 a.m., homework squeezed into breaks, sleep grabbed in 4-hour intervals. Her textbooks were all used, bought from students graduating the semester before, their margins filled with someone else's notes that she'd carefully erased and replaced with her own. She was the oldest of 3 siblings, the first in her family to make it past high school, carrying the weight of her mother's sacrifices like a backpack full of stones. Lorraine Cole had cleaned office buildings at night for 18 years, so Kenya could sit in these lecture halls during the day. There was no trust fund waiting if she failed, no family business to fall back on, no second chances. Education was her rope out of the quicksand of poverty, and she gripped it with both hands. Her younger brothers depended on her setting the example, proving that escape was possible. Every A she earned was a signpost for them. Every semester completed was proof that their mother's exhaustion meant something. Failure wasn't an option. It was a luxury people with safety nets could afford. "Kendrick Vale?" Professor Morrison called the name during roll like any other, and Kenya didn't look up from her notebook where she was already outlining the semester's major topics based on the syllabus. She'd arrived 20 minutes early, claimed a seat in the third row, close enough to show engagement, far enough back to avoid being called on constantly. The door opened just as Professor Morrison moved to the next name. Kenya felt the shift in the room's atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable, like the pressure change before a storm. She glanced up to see him walk in, not strutting, not apologizing, just moving with the quiet confidence of someone who expected space to make room for him. He was tall but not imposing, dressed in dark jeans and a simple grey Henley that probably cost more than her entire outfit but didn't scream money. He scanned the room, and Kenya realized with a sinking feeling that the only empty seat was the one beside her. "Mr. Vale, how nice of you to join us," Professor Morrison said, his tone carefully neutral. "We're discussing the syllabus. My apologies, Professor. GPS led me to the wrong building." His voice carried no arrogance, just a hint of self-deprecation that made a few students smile. He slid into the seat beside Kenya, bringing with him the subtle scent of expensive soap and something else, coffee, strong and recent. Kenya tried to refocus on Professor Morrison's explanation of the semester's major ethical frameworks, but she was acutely aware of Kendrick beside her, pulling out a leather notebook, searching his pockets for a pen. She watched from the corner of her eye as he found one, then pulled out a folded campus map that looked brand new. Around them, she noticed other students whispering, glancing at Kendrick with recognition. A girl 2 rows back leaned toward her friend and murmured something that made them both look his way. But Kenya had learned early that campus politics and social hierarchies were distractions she couldn't afford. Whoever he was outside this classroom didn't matter. In here, he was just another student who'd shown up late. Kendrick spent 30 seconds studying his campus map, then wrote something on the corner and slid it slightly toward Kenya. "Is this Ethics 201 or 210? Despite herself, Kenya felt her lips twitch. She grabbed her own pen and wrote back, 201. You're late to the right place." He read it, and she caught his smile. Not the practiced one she'd seen him give the professor, but something genuine and slightly embarrassed. He wrote again, "First day, still learning the campus geography. I'm Kendrick, I know. The professor called your name. I'm Kenya, Kenya. Like the country? Like the country my grandmother never got to visit but always dreamed about." He paused at that, seeming to really read her words rather than just glance at them. Then, "That's beautiful. My name just means my parents wanted a son who sounded like he'd run a boardroom." Kenya had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. She wrote back, "Well, you're in ethics, not business, so maybe you're already disappointing them." His shoulders shook with silent laughter, and Professor Morrison shot them a warning look. They both straightened, but Kenya felt something shift, like a door opening to a room she hadn't known existed. When class ended, Kendrick lingered as she gathered her books. "Do you tutor? I might need help keeping up if I keep getting lost on campus. I tutor calculus and chemistry, not common sense and navigation." Ouch. But he was still smiling. Fair point. Maybe I'll just have to show up on time from now on. Revolutionary concept. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and Kenya felt an unwelcome flutter in her chest that she immediately shut down. She had rules. Rule 1, no distractions. Rule 2, especially not distractions in expensive jeans who made her want to smile. The semester progressed in a series of small moments that accumulated like snow, each one insignificant alone but together, forming something substantial. Kendrick started arriving 5 minutes early instead of 5 minutes late. By the third week, he was saving her seat when she rushed in from her previous class across campus. They developed a rhythm. He'd have his coffee, she'd have her water bottle and granola bar. "You know coffee will stunt your growth," she said one day, eyeing his third cup before noon. "Too late for that concern," he replied. Besides, I don't actually like it. Then why drink it? My father drinks it the same way. I started when I was 16, trying to seem mature in business meetings. He shrugged. Now it's just a habit. That's the saddest thing I've heard all day. Your turn. Tell me something sad about you. I haven't slept more than 5 hours straight in 2 years. That's not sad, that's concerning. That's life, Kenya corrected. Some of us don't get to choose our schedules. Instead of getting defensive, the way she'd expected, he nodded thoughtfully. You're right. I'm sorry. That was a privileged thing to say. She was so used to students getting offended when called out that his simple acknowledgement caught her off guard. Maybe he wasn't as oblivious as she'd assumed. Study sessions became their unspoken routine. He'd ask genuine questions about her perspective on the readings. She'd challenge his assumptions when they veered too theoretical, grounding philosophical concepts in the reality of people who couldn't afford to debate ethics. They just had to survive them. Kant's categorical imperative is elegant in theory, she said during one discussion about moral absolutes. But when you're choosing between lying on a job application and feeding your family, always tell the truth becomes a luxury position. So you're saying ethics are relative to circumstances. I'm saying ethics look different when you're not insulated from consequences. It's easy to be honest when you have a safety net. He sat with that, really considered it instead of arguing. I never thought about it that way. That's privilege, she said, not unkindly. Not seeing the cost because you've never had to pay it. What Kenya didn't know, what Kendrick deliberately avoided mentioning, was that other. Students already knew exactly who he was. Vale Global Enterprises wasn't just a company. It was an empire worth billions. Gregory Vale had built it from a small tech startup into a multinational corporation that touched everything from secure communications to financial systems. Kendrick's enrollment had been mentioned in the local business journal, though he'd requested the university keep it low-key. The development office had already reached out about future donations. Board members knew his family name before they knew his face. In hallways, students whispered when he passed. That's Vale's son, they'd murmur, worth more than everyone in this building combined. Professors had received polite calls from administration suggesting they support Mr. Vale's academic journey, but with Kenya, none of that existed. She treated him like any other student. Actually, she treated him slightly worse, calling him out when he made assumptions, challenging his arguments in class discussions, completely unimpressed by his expensive watch or the way other students deferred to him. It was intoxicating. For the first time in his life, someone saw him as just Kendrick, not the Vale heir, not the future CEO, not the walking symbol of his father's success. Just a guy who got lost finding classrooms and drank coffee he didn't like and was trying to figure out who he wanted to be instead of who he was supposed to become. He was careful never to mention his father's company, never to bring up the trust fund waiting for him, never to explain why professors sometimes gave him extra consideration. He paid for their occasional coffee with cash, drove a modest car to campus instead of the luxury sedan sitting in his apartment garage, dressed down in a way that blended rather than stood out. With Kenya, he could be real, and it really felt like oxygen after years of performing. Kenya had rules written in mental stone and carved by experience. Rule 1. Education came first, always. Every assignment completed, every test aced, every professor impressed, was another brick in the bridge, carrying her family out of generational poverty. Rule 2. No distractions that could derail her goals. Romance was a luxury for people with time and emotional energy to spare. She had neither. Rule 3. Especially no boys who'd clearly never struggled a day in their lives. She'd watched her mother fall for promises from men who left when reality got hard. She wouldn't repeat that pattern. Rule 4. Never depend on anyone but herself. Self-sufficiency was armor and weapon both. Kendrick was threatening every single rule. She noticed things she wished she didn't. The way he actually listened when she talked, leaning in slightly, never checking his phone or letting his attention drift. How he'd walk her to the bus stop after evening classes, matching her pace without complaint even though she knew his car was parked in the opposite direction. The way he brought 2 granola bars instead of 1, leaving the extra on her desk without comment when he noticed she'd skipped lunch again. "Stop trying to take care of me," she said one evening as he casually mentioned the campus shuttle that ran later than the bus. "I'm not trying to take care of you, I'm sharing information. While walking me to the bus stop, I like the exercise, it's 50 feet. I have very specific fitness goals." She laughed, despite herself, and that was the problem. He made her laugh when she was exhausted. He made her think when she was numb from memorization. He made her feel when she'd trained herself to focus only on survival. Worse, he made her want things she'd convinced herself she didn't need: companionship, partnership, someone to share the weight instead of carrying it alone. But wanting was dangerous. Wanting led to depending, and depending led to disappointment. She'd learned that lesson young and well. "Let me buy you coffee," he said one October afternoon as they left class. As thanks for explaining Kant's categorical imperative in terms that actually made sense. "No, it's just coffee, Kenya. I work nights at a diner. I have access to all the coffee I could ever want. Then let me buy you good coffee, real coffee, not the industrial strength stuff they serve at diners." She stopped walking and faced him fully. The autumn sun lit his face, highlighting the genuine confusion there. He really didn't understand what he was asking. "I buy my own coffee, Kendrick. I pay my own way. That's how this works. This isn't about coffee, is it?" "No," she admitted. "It's about maintaining boundaries. It's about remembering that your world and mine intersect in this classroom and nowhere else. What if I want them to intersect elsewhere? Then you want something I can't give you." His expression shifted, something like hurt, flickering across his features before he controlled it. "Can't or won't. Does it matter?" "Yes. Can't mean circumstances. Won't mean choice. I can work with the circumstances." Kenya shook her head, resuming her walk toward the bus stop. "You can't work with mine. They're not the kind money solves or charm navigates. They're the kind that exist, because our lives are built on different foundations entirely." He caught up, matching her stride. "Try me. Why? Why does this matter to you?" He was quiet for several steps. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she'd heard before. "Because you're the only person I've met here who treats me like I'm just me. Not my family name, not my future prospects, just Kendrick who can't find buildings and makes terrible jokes. That's rare. That's valuable. And I don't want to lose it over a cup of coffee." Kenya's resolve wavered. She understood rare and valuable, had so little of either in her own life that she recognized it immediately in his voice. "1 coffee," she said finally. "Dutch. We each pay our own. And this doesn't change anything." His smile was worth more than he'd ever known. Deal. The coffee shop was deliberately neutral. Not too expensive, not a chain, the kind of place where students actually studied instead of performing. They claimed a corner table, and what was supposed to be a quick drink turned into 3 hours of conversation that felt like opening doors neither had known existed. Kenya told him about Lorraine Cole working multiple jobs, about her brothers who needed her to succeed so they'd believe they could, too, about the scholarship that was her only reason for being here. "My mother works nights cleaning the kind of buildings where people like your family probably work during the day," Kenya said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "She comes home with her knees aching and her hands raw, and she tells me it's all worth it because I'm here. That's the weight I carry every single day, Her sacrifices have to mean something. They do, Kendrick said quietly. You're here. You're brilliant. You're going to do something that matters. How do you know? Because you already are. You matter to your brothers, to your mother, to every argument you make in class that forces people like me to think beyond our comfortable assumptions. Kenya looked away, blinking against unexpected emotion. Compliments felt dangerous. They made her want to believe in possibilities she couldn't afford. Kendrick shared pieces of his own story with careful honesty. His mother had died when he was 12, cancer that his father had fought with money and connections, and ultimately lost anyway. Gregory Vale had responded by working 18-hour days and hiring nannies who weren't allowed to show too much affection because he believed it would make his son weak. I grew up in a house full of people and completely alone, Kendrick said. My father let nannies raise me, tutors educate me, coaches train me. But nobody was allowed to just love me. That was seen as making me soft, unsuitable for running an empire. That's horrible. That's Gregory Vale. Everything is about building strength, creating legacy, beating the competition. Even grief is just another weakness to overcome. Kenya reached across the table without thinking, touching his hand briefly, just enough to say she understood, that she saw the hurt underneath his composed exterior. He caught her fingers for a moment before she pulled away, the contact electric and terrifying in equal measure. You don't have to be him, she said quietly. You don't have to outdo your father or live up to his expectations. You just have to be you. The look he gave her then was so vulnerable, so grateful, that she had to look away before she did something foolish like climb across the table and hold him until that lost expression left his eyes. They talked about dreams, to build technology that actually helped people instead of just generating profit, hers to become a physician's assistant and bring healthcare to communities like the one she'd grown up in. They talked about philosophy and family and the weird intersection of nature versus nurture. They talked until the coffee shop staff started stacking chairs around them. Walking to her bus stop afterward, the autumn air crisp and clean, Kendrick said, "Thank you for today, for seeing me, thank you for being worth seeing." The bus arrived before either could say more, but as Kenya found her seat and watched him standing on the curb through the window, she knew something fundamental had shifted. Her rules were crumbling, and she was terrified of what would be left when they fell completely. November arrived with early frost and the kind of exhaustion that came from midterm season. They'd just finished a brutal 3-hour study session preparing for Professor Morrison's notorious exam that had a 30% failure rate. The campus was quiet, most students having retreated to dorms or apartments, the library closing early for maintenance. Kenya stood at the bus stop, checking her phone for the schedule. "The bus comes in 12 minutes, she said. "I know. You don't have to wait with me. I know that too." They stood in comfortable silence, their breath visible in the cold air. Kenya pulled her thin jacket tighter. She'd been meaning to buy a warmer one, but textbooks had eaten that budget. Without asking, Kendrick stepped closer, positioning himself to block the wind. Not touching, just shielding. "Kenya," he said softly. "Don't. I haven't said anything yet. You're about to. I can feel it. And whatever it is, just don't. What if I said you're the first person in my life who sees me as just me? Not my family's expectations or my future responsibilities, just Kendrick who likes terrible coffee and gets lost on campus. Then I'd say you need better friends. What if I said I think about you when I'm not with you, that I replay our conversations and wonder what you'd say about things I read or see? Then I'd say you need more homework. What if I said—" She turned to face him, intending to stop whatever confession was building, but found him closer than expected. Close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body despite the November cold, close enough that when he lifted his hand to cup her cheek, she leaned into it instead of pulling away. The kiss was nothing like dramatic moments in movies. It was quiet and questioning, soft and searching. He tasted like the mint gum he always chewed, and possibility and risk. Her hands found his jacket, not pulling him closer but not pushing away either, suspended in that moment between yes and no. When they separated, Kenya's eyes remained closed for a heartbeat longer, trying to memorize the feeling before reality crashed back in. "That was a mistake," she whispered. "Maybe," he agreed, his forehead resting against hers, "but it didn't feel like one." The bus arrived before she could respond, its doors opening with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like the universe exhaling. She climbed on without looking back, but she could feel him watching until the bus turned the corner. Her fingers touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss, still tasting the danger of wanting something she couldn't afford to have. It felt like home, and that terrified her more than any amount of attraction could have. Because Kenya Cole had learned young that home was just another word for something you'd eventually lose. And losing Kendrick Vale, who was never really hers to begin with, would hurt in ways she didn't know if she could survive. The campus cafe buzzed with afternoon energy, students cramming for finals, the espresso machine hissing like an angry cat. Kenya and Kendrick had claimed their usual corner table, books spread between them like a barrier against the world. She was explaining her thesis on economic inequality when his phone vibrated against the wooden surface. "It's my father," he said, the warmth leaving his eyes. "I should take this. Go ahead. I'll review my notes." But the cafe was small, and Gregory Vale's voice carried through Kendrick's phone like thunder through thin walls. Kenya tried to focus on her textbook, but certain words cut through her concentration like knives. "You missed the board meeting again. Not a question, an accusation." "I had classes, Dad. We discussed this." "Classes?" Gregory turned the word into something shameful. "You're 22, Kendrick. Your peers are already running divisions, and you're sitting in lecture halls learning theories from professors who've never built anything real." "I'm getting my degree." "That was always the plan. The plan was for you to intern at Vale Global this semester. I've already had 3 board members ask me when you're joining the executive training program. I told you I wanted to finish my education first. What you want is to waste time playing as a college student." A pause, heavy with judgment. "And I know about the girl, the scholarship student from the East Side." "Don't call her that, Kendrick," voice dropped dangerously low. "What should I call her? An investment in your future? A learning experience?" Gregory's tone dripped with condescension. "These girls are always drawn to the money, the lifestyle, the access. But when reality hits, when they realize what being a Vale actually means and requires—" "Stop. I'm trying to protect you. And the image of this family. Vale Global is negotiating contracts worth billions. Our partners need to see stability, continuity, and appropriate connections, not some temporary campus romance with a girl who serves coffee for tips." Kenya felt each word like a physical blow. Girl who serves coffee for tips. Campus romance. Temporary. Kendrick ended the call without another word, his hand trembling slightly as he set the phone down. The silence between them stretched, filled with the cafe's ambient noise and the weight of what she'd just heard. "How much did you hear?" he asked without looking at her. "Enough. Kenya. Is that what I am to him? A charity case? A phase you're going through? The scholarship girl from the wrong side of town who doesn't understand her place? You're nothing to him because he doesn't know you." Kendrick finally met her eyes. He's making judgments about someone he's never met based on classist assumptions and outdated social hierarchies. But he knows about me. Knows where I'm from, knows I'm on scholarship, knows I work nights. She closed her notebook with deliberate calm, the kind of control that came before breaking. Someone's been reporting back to him. keeping him informed about your unsuitable attachment. I never described you that way. Then how did you describe me when you told him? She leaned forward, voice quiet but intense. What words did you use when you explained to your billionaire father that you were dating the girl who can barely afford textbooks? I told him you were important to me, that you were brilliant and strong and made me want to be better than the legacy he's trying to force on me, and clearly that went over well. Kenya started packing her things, textbooks into her worn backpack, notes folded and tucked away. Your father thinks I'm temporary, a learning experience. And you know what the worst part is? He's probably right. Don't do that. Don't let his narrow worldview define what this is. Then you define it. She stopped packing and looked at him directly, challenging. Tell him who I am. To his face. Not just to me in cafes where no one from your real life can see us. Introduce me to him properly. Stand next to me at one of those galas you're always being invited to. Show the world that Kendrick Vale is dating Kenya Cole, and her zip code doesn't make her worth less. The silence that followed was answer enough. That's what I thought, Kenya said quietly, resuming her packing. It's not that simple. It never is with people like you. She shouldered her backpack. You want me to exist in this bubble where we're just two students falling for each other. But I can't be your secret, Kendrick. I won't be something you're ashamed of when the real world comes calling. I'm not ashamed of you, then prove it. Because right now, your silence says more than your words ever could. She left before he could respond, walking out into the December cold without a backward glance. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. Some conversations couldn't be continued until actions replaced promises. 3 weeks passed in strained silence. Kenya threw herself into finals, into extra shifts at the diner, into anything that kept her mind off Kendrick's texts that went from apologetic to pleading to eventually stopping altogether. Then the letter arrived. Dear Miss Cole, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of 3 student speakers at this year's annual scholarship gala. Your academic achievements and compelling personal story make you an ideal representative of our program's mission. The gala was being held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, black tie optional, with donors and university administration in attendance. It was an honor, an opportunity, a chance to show that scholarship students were more than statistics, that they had voices and value beyond the financial aid they received. It was also, she discovered when she read the donor list, being primarily sponsored by Vale Global Enterprises. You have to go, Lorraine Cole said that evening, carefully pressing the simple navy dress they'd found at a discount store. Kenya's mother had taken a rare night off to help her daughter prepare, her pride evident in every careful movement of the iron. I don't have to do anything. Baby girl, this is recognition. This is them seeing what I've always known, that you're exceptional, that you belong in those rooms just as much as anyone else. Lorraine set down the iron and took Kenya's face in her work-worn hands. Don't let some boy's cowardice make you hide your light. His father will be there, Gregory Vale himself, at the head table, probably judging every word I say. Then you speak the truth so clearly he can't dismiss it. You show him that his money doesn't make him better, just more obligated to do right by people he's never bothered to see. Kenya's younger brothers appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of their mother's passionate speech. You're going to be amazing tonight, her brother said seriously, all of 14 and trying to sound older. You're going to show all those rich people that we're just as good as them. Better, added her youngest brother, 12 and fiercely loyal. Because we had to work harder to get there. Looking at her family, her mother who'd sacrificed everything, her brothers who needed her to succeed so they'd believe they could too, Kenya felt her resolve solidify. This speech wasn't about Kendrick or his father's approval. It was about every person who'd been dismissed as a charity case, every student told they didn't belong, every family that cleaned the buildings they'd never be welcomed into during daylight hours. If Gregory Vale wanted to see her as temporary and insignificant, fine. But he'd have to look her in the eye while she spoke her truth first. The grand ballroom gleamed with more wealth than Kenya's neighborhood would see in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece an arrangement of flowers that probably cost more than her textbooks. A banner hung above the stage, investing in tomorrow's leaders, with the Vale Global logo prominently displayed alongside other corporate sponsors. Kenya arrived early, as instructed, wearing her pressed navy dress and the single strand of pearls her grandmother had left her. She felt exposed and defiant in equal measure, not dressed as expensively as the donors, but carrying herself with the dignity Lorraine had taught her was more valuable than any designer label. She saw him immediately, Kendrick at the front donor table, looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, flanked by an older man who could only be Gregory Vale. The family resemblance was strong, but where Kendrick's features carried warmth, his father's were cold, carved from expensive stone and old money arrogance. Beside Gregory sat a woman in her 50s, perfectly composed, wearing a designer suit that screamed power and position. Kenya recognized her from the university donor reception. Evelyn Hart, listed in the program as Vale Global's Chief Operating Officer and University Board Member. Kendrick's eyes found hers across the room. For a moment, his face lit up and he started to rise from his chair. Gregory's hand on his arm stopped him mid-motion, a gesture so small yet so definitive that Kenya felt it like a physical barrier between them. She was seated with other scholarship recipients near the middle of the room, their table notably missing the champagne and elaborate appetizers that graced the donor section. The divide was architectural, intentional, impossible to ignore. During the cocktail hour before speeches, Kenya stood with fellow students, making small talk about classes and career plans, trying to ignore the way Kendrick kept glancing her direction while his father spoke to various donors. Then the crowd shifted, parting the way crowds did for people with power and money. Gregory Vale was making his rounds, thanking donors, his son reluctantly in tow. An assistant whispered names in his ear before each introduction. They reached Kenya's group, and Gregory's assistant leaned in, murmuring something. Gregory's face remained perfectly composed, but Kenya saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. "Miss Cole," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was brief, professional, cold enough to leave frost. "I understand you're one of tonight's speakers. How nice." The pause before nice spoke volumes. "Thank you for your support of the scholarship program, Mr. Vale," Kenya said, keeping her voice steady. Vale Global's contributions make education possible for students who might otherwise never have the opportunity. We believe in investing wisely. His emphasis on wisely was subtle but unmistakable, his eyes assessing her like a quarterly report that wasn't performing to expectations. Education should go to those who use it productively, who understand the responsibilities that come with such opportunities. The implication was clear. Don't waste this on inappropriate relationships. Remember your place. Kendrick opened his mouth to say something, but Gregory continued smoothly. "Kendrick, we should return to our table. The mayor wanted to discuss the downtown development project." "Good luck with your speech, Kenya," Kendrick said, his eyes apologizing even as his feet followed his father. And then they were gone, leaving Kenya standing with other students who suddenly seemed very interested in their drinks. The dismissal was masterful, publicly polite, privately devastating. She'd been acknowledged and dismissed in the same breath, reduced to a line item in Gregory Vale's evening of networking. When her name was called, Kenya walked to the podium on legs steadier than her heart. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of expensive fabrics and expectant faces. She gripped the edges of the podium and made herself look directly at the front table, where Gregory Vale sat with calculated disinterest, and Kendrick leaned forward with something that looked like hope and dread mixed together. "Good evening. My name is Kenya Cole, and I'm the daughter of a woman who cleans your offices at night so I can learn in your classrooms during the day." A ripple went through the crowd, surprise at her directness, discomfort at the truth stated so plainly. "My mother, Lorraine Cole, has worked 18-hour days for 18 years. She missed meals so her children could eat, wore the same coat for 3 winters so we could have warm clothing, chose between her own health care and our school supplies more times than I can count. This scholarship doesn't just change my life. It validates every sacrifice she's ever made. Every night she comes home too exhausted to speak, but never too tired to ask about our homework." She found Kendrick's face in the crowd, saw him hanging on every word while his father's expression remained carved from stone. "Education isn't just an opportunity for people like me, it's oxygen. It's the difference between repeating generational cycles and breaking them. When you invest in students from my neighborhood, you're not doing charity, you're making the smartest investment possible. Because we know what failure costs. We've seen it destroy families, crush dreams, turn potential into poverty. And that knowledge makes us fight harder, study longer, and refuse to quit, even when every statistic says we should." The audience was completely silent now. Even the servers along the walls had stopped moving. "We're not charity cases. We're not diversity statistics for your annual reports. We're not temporary learning experiences." Her eyes locked with Gregory's, and she let him see her defiance. "We're the future you're investing in, whether you believe we belong in your world or not, and we'll prove our worth not by conforming to your expectations, but by exceeding them so thoroughly you'll wonder how you ever dismissed us in the first place." She paused, letting the words settle. "So thank you for your financial support. But understand this. We don't owe you gratitude that comes with silence. We owe you results that come with voices. And we're just getting started." The applause started slowly, then built, genuine, thunderous. Board members were nodding, donors leaning toward each other in animated discussion. Kendrick was on his feet, pride evident on his face, even as his father remained rigidly seated. But Gregory Vale's expression was what Kenya would remember later. Not anger, not dismissal, but calculation. The look of a man who just realized an underestimated opponent was more dangerous than he'd anticipated. Kenya was gathering her coat from the check room when a manicured hand touched her elbow. "Miss Cole, that was quite an inspiring speech." Evelyn Hart stood beside her, immaculate in her designer suit, a smile perfectly calibrated between warmth and assessment. "Thank you. Walk with me to the valet?" "I'd love to chat for a moment." It wasn't really a request. They walked through the hotel's marble lobby, Evelyn's heels clicking with metronomic precision against the polished floor. "You photograph well," Evelyn said conversationally. "The marketing team captured some wonderful images of you at the podium. Very compelling visual, the determined scholarship student making good. It's exactly the narrative donors want to see." "It's not a narrative, it's my life." "Of course. And what a life you're building." Evelyn's tone remained pleasant, conversational. "It would be such a shame if anything derailed that journey. You've worked so hard, overcome so much. The last thing you need is complications." Kenya stopped walking. "Is that a threat?" "Heavens, no. Just an observation from someone who's navigated these worlds much longer than you." Evelyn's smile never wavered. "I sit on several boards. University Scholarship Committee, professional development programs, graduate school advisory panels. I've seen many bright students like yourself. The ones who succeed are those who stay focused, who don't let temporary distractions compromise their long-term goals. Temporary distractions, relationships that seem meaningful in the moment, but can't survive the reality of vastly different trajectories." Evelyn pulled a thin envelope from her clutch. Gregory asked me to give you this. Consider it appreciation for your speech tonight and recognition of your potential. Kenya didn't take the envelope. I don't want his money. It's not money, it's information. Contact details for some excellent opportunities, internships, programs, connections that could transform your career trajectory. Many of them are in other cities. Fresh starts, you might say. Places where you could build something remarkable without the complications of entangled personal histories. You mean far from Kendrick? Evelyn's expression shifted to something almost sympathetic. My dear, Kendrick has a destiny that was written before he was born. Vale Global employs 14,000 people. Families depend on our stability, our reputation, our strategic partnerships. His marriage, and yes, marriage, will be a merger as much as a romance. That's the reality for people at his level. That's medieval. That's business. That's legacy. That's what happens when your personal choices affect thousands of lives and billions in market value. Evelyn's voice gentled, becoming almost maternal. You care about him, I can see that, but if you truly care, you'll understand that your presence in his life right now is a distraction he cannot afford. There are deals on the table worth more than some countries' GDP. Partnerships that could dissolve if the wrong people think he's unstable, unfocused, making poor judgments. I'm not asking him to choose me over his company. Aren't you? Every moment he spends torn between two worlds is a moment he's not fully committed to either. Every argument with his father over this relationship is energy diverted from building his future. Every risk he takes defending you is a crack in the foundation of what he's meant to become. Evelyn held out the envelope again. Walk away, Kenya. Quietly, cleanly. Let him think it was your choice, that you realized the gap between your worlds was too wide. No scenes, no ultimatums, just disappear gracefully. That's the kindest thing you can do for someone you love. Kenya stared at the envelope, understanding the power dynamic at play. Evelyn wasn't offering a bribe. She was offering a socially acceptable exit that would protect everyone's dignity while achieving Gregory's goal of separation. And if I don't take it? If I don't disappear gracefully? Evelyn's smile thinned. Then things become more complicated. Scholarship funding is reviewed annually. Recommendations for graduate programs require committee approval. Your mother's employer, I believe they clean several buildings owned by Vale Global Partners. Contracts come up for renewal. Jobs become precarious. You destroy my family's livelihood over a college relationship? I wouldn't do anything, but the business world is small and reputation matters. Companies make decisions based on many factors, most of them invisible to people outside those circles. Evelyn's voice remained pleasant, reasonable. I'm not threatening you, Kenya. I'm explaining reality. When you challenge people with Gregory Vale's resources and connections, collateral damage happens. Maybe not directly, maybe not obviously, but it happens. She tucked the envelope back into her clutch, since Kenya wouldn't take it. Think about it. You're brilliant, determined, clearly capable of remarkable things. Don't let pride or a college romance destroy the future you fought so hard to build. And don't make your mother pay for choices that feel romantic now but will seem foolish in hindsight. Evelyn's car pulled up, sleek, expensive, driven by a professional chauffeur. She paused before getting in. You asked if this was a threat. It's not. It's a choice. You can walk away with dignity and opportunity intact, or you can fight a battle you cannot win against people who play a game you don't even know the rules to. Choose wisely, Miss Cole. You strike me as someone who understands survival. Then she was gone, leaving Kenya standing under the hotel's entrance lights, the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders, like snow that would eventually bury her if she didn't move. That night, Kenya lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while her brothers slept in the next room. The apartment was quiet except for the drip of the kitchen faucet they couldn't afford to fix properly, and the distant sound of the city that never fully slept. She wasn't afraid for herself. She'd survived worse than rich people's disapproval, could handle doors closing and opportunities vanishing. Her pride could weather storms that would break people who'd never learned to bend. But her mother's tired face haunted her. Lorraine had already sacrificed so much, her health, her time, her own dreams, all laid on the altar of her children's futures. How could Kenya let that woman lose her livelihood because her daughter had fallen for someone impossibly inappropriate? And her brothers, they were watching, learning, building their own sense of what was possible based on what Kenya achieved. If she stayed and fought and lost everything, what lesson would that teach them? That love mattered more than survival, that pride was worth poverty. She thought of Kendrick's face at the gala, the way he'd wanted to come to her but hadn't fought hard enough to do it, the way he'd let his father pull him away, chosen the path of least resistance over standing publicly beside her. If he truly loved her, wouldn't he have introduced her to Gregory months ago? Wouldn't he have made their relationship public instead of treating it like something that existed only in cafes and study sessions? Wouldn't he have defied his father's expectations instead of just disagreeing with them privately? Maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe this was temporary, a learning experience that felt profound now but would fade when reality asserted itself. Maybe the kindest thing she could do, for all of them, was walk away before the damage became irreparable. But even as she thought it, tears slid down her temples into her hair, because knowing the practical choice didn't make it hurt less, didn't make her love him less, didn't make the unfairness of a world where money could dictate who deserved happiness any easier to swallow. She touched her stomach, thought about the nausea she'd been attributing to stress, the fatigue she'd blamed on her schedule. She'd missed her period, but that happened sometimes when she was overwhelmed. It didn't mean, except she knew. Somewhere deep in her bones, she already knew. If you're still with me and you feel the weight of Kenya's decision, drop pressure in the comments. Let me know, what would you do if love meant risking your family's future? And if this story is pulling you in, hit like so YouTube knows to show Mr. Steele rich stories to more people who need these lessons. 2 weeks after the gala, the carefully constructed walls of Kenya's life began crumbling with surgical precision. First, Lorraine collapsed during her shift. Not dramatically, not suddenly. She simply sat down on the floor of the office building she was cleaning and couldn't get back up. Exhaustion, the emergency room doctor said, complicated by untreated hypertension and anemia from years of inadequate nutrition and overwork. The hospital bills arrived like an avalanche. $4,000 for the emergency room visit, another $3,000 for tests and overnight observation, ongoing medication costs of hundreds each month, for conditions that should have been managed years ago but weren't, because healthcare was a luxury Lorraine couldn't afford. Then came the meeting with her scholarship advisor, Professor Chen, who'd always been supportive, encouraging, proud of her progress. Kenya, there have been some concerns raised about your academic focus, he said, not meeting her eyes. The first sign something was deeply wrong. My grades are perfect. I haven't missed an assignment. This isn't about grades. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's about fit, cultural fit. Some board members feel you might benefit from taking a semester off, reassessing your goals, considering whether this particular program is the right environment for your continued success. Cultural fit, Kenya's voice went flat. Which board members? I'm not at liberty to say, but the scholarship committee will be reviewing your status at the end of the semester. I wanted to give you advance warning so you can prepare for various outcomes. She understood perfectly. This was Evelyn Hart's doing. Gregory Vale's influence moving through channels she couldn't see or fight. They were applying pressure precisely where it would hurt most, demonstrating their power while maintaining plausible deniability. That evening, sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the cool tile, she finally took the pregnancy test she'd been avoiding. The nausea hadn't stopped. Her period was now 3 weeks late, and deep down she'd already known before the 2 pink lines appeared to confirm it. Pregnant, with Kendrick's child. While his world systematically pushed her out and her own world crumbled under the weight of impossible choices, she sat there until her legs went numb, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach where a new life was beginning. A child who would change everything, who deserved better than parents torn apart by circumstances neither could control. Every choice she made now affected not just her, but this baby. Stay and fight, and risk losing everything. Scholarship, mother's job, brother's futures, all of it destroyed to prove a point about love conquering all. Walk away and raise this child alone, but at least raise them with stability, with the resources a completed education could provide. The test clattered to the floor, pink lines screaming the truth she wasn't ready to face. Some people get to choose love in a vacuum, where the only hearts at risk are their own. Kenya Cole had to choose it with her mother's health on the line, her brother's futures at stake, and a new life beating quietly under her heart. She thought of Kendrick's face when he'd wanted to rise from that donor table, but let his father's hand stop him. Thought of Evelyn's envelope and Gregory's cold assessment. Thought of her mother in a hospital bed and her brothers needing her to succeed. And she thought of the baby, their baby, who deserved parents who fought for them, not parents destroyed by fighting everyone else. Tomorrow she will have to decide. Tonight, she let herself cry on a bathroom floor, mourning a future that had never really been possible, grieving a love that circumstances had doomed from the start. The pregnancy test lay beside her like evidence of hope and heartbreak combined, proof that something beautiful had grown from what they'd shared, and that beauty would now become the hardest secret she'd ever have to keep. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and despair. Kenya sat beside her mother's bed for the 3rd night that week, watching monitors track Lorraine's blood pressure, while bills accumulated on the bedside table like accusations. The emergency room visit had turned into 3 days of observation, then a week of medication adjustments, then ongoing treatment that required follow-up appointments Lorraine couldn't afford to take time off for. "Stop looking at those," Lorraine whispered, her voice weak but aware. "We'll figure it out. We always do. Mama, you need to rest. I need to get back to work. Bills don't pay themselves. The doctor said you can't work for at least another month. Your blood pressure will be fine once I stop worrying about rent." Lorraine shifted in the hospital bed, wincing. "How are your brothers managing?" "They're fine. I'm handling everything." Kenya didn't mention that handling everything meant picking up double shifts at the diner, falling asleep over textbooks at 3 a.m., and avoiding Kendrick's increasingly worried texts. She also didn't mention the pregnancy test hidden in her bathroom trash, or the morning sickness she was attributing to stress when her brothers asked why she wasn't eating breakfast. That night, after her brothers were asleep and her mother was settled with medication, Kenya sat at their kitchen table and mapped out every possible path forward. Her scholarship was under review. Her mother couldn't work. The hospital bills exceeded $10,000. And in approximately 8 months, she'd have a baby who deserved better than the disaster her life was becoming. Path 1. Tell Kendrick everything. Watch Gregory Vale deploy his resources to destroy her family as promised. Lose the scholarship, lose her mother's job, gain nothing but the satisfaction of honesty that wouldn't feed a baby or pay rent. Path 2. Stay silent, stay in school, keep fighting. Watch her mother's health deteriorate from stress and overwork. Watch the scholarship committee manufacture reasons to revoke her funding. Bring a child into a battle she was losing. Path 3. Disappear. Leave the city, start over somewhere Gregory Vale's influence couldn't reach. Raise the baby alone, but at least raise them without the constant threat of retaliation. Protect everyone by removing herself from the equation entirely. The math was brutal when you removed emotion from the calculation. One person's sacrifice could save 4 lives: her mother, her brothers, her unborn child, even Kendrick himself, from having to choose between family and love. At 3 m, Kenya began writing the letter that would change everything. Her hand shook as she wrote, tears blurring the words, but she forced herself to continue. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not because I don't love you. I love you so completely it's rewritten everything I thought I knew about myself. But because love isn't enough when the scales are this unbalanced. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. I found out the same week my mother collapsed. The same week your father's people made it clear my presence in your life threatens everything you're meant to build. I could stay and fight, make you choose between me and your legacy, but that's not love. That's selfishness. Your father is right about one thing. I don't belong in your world. Not because I'm worth less, but because your world demands prices I can't pay. It asks me to watch my mother's health fail. It asks my brothers to lose their futures. It asks our child to grow up as either your shame or your obligation. I won't do that to any of us. I'm not telling you where I'm going because I know you try to find me, try to fix this. But some things can't be fixed, only survived. I'll raise our baby to be strong, kind and brave. I'll tell them their father was a good man who would have loved them if the world had been different. Maybe one day, when you've built the life you dream of and I've survived mine, we'll meet again as equals. Maybe your child will find you when they're old enough to understand why I made this choice. Maybe you'll forgive me for taking this decision away from you. Please don't look for me. Please don't wait for me. Please build something beautiful with your life. Something that makes all of this worth it. I love you. I'll love you at 2 a.m. when the baby kicks. I'll love you when they take their first steps. I'll love you when they ask about their father and I have to choose between truth and protection. I'll love you badly and desperately and forever, but from a distance that keeps everyone safe. Be happy, Kendrick. That's the only thing that will make this bearable. Always, Kenya. She sealed the envelope with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, addressed it to his campus mailbox, and walked through the pre-dawn darkness to the student center. The overnight mail slot waited like a mouth ready to swallow her last connection to him. Kenya stood there for 5 full minutes, envelope in hand, giving herself one final chance to change her mind, to choose differently, to believe that love could actually conquer the practical realities of power and money and family obligation. Then she thought of her mother's hospital bed, her brother's futures, the baby growing inside her who deserved stability more than romance. The metal slot closed with a sound like finality, swallowing her words and her hope in one irreversible moment. Monday morning brought Evelyn Hart to the university administration building. As a board member and major donor liaison, she had access most people never questioned. The student services coordinator smiled when Evelyn mentioned needing to verify some scholarship correspondence. Of course, MS Hart. Take whatever time you need. The campus mail system was outdated, still relying partly on physical mailboxes for official university correspondence. Evelyn moved through the rows with practiced efficiency, looking for one specific name. There, Kendrick Vale's box, stuffed with the usual university announcements and club flyers. And there, unmistakable, an envelope in handwriting she'd seen on scholarship applications. Kenya Cole's careful penmanship, the kind that came from someone who knew presentation mattered when you couldn't afford mistakes. The envelope was thick, suggesting multiple pages, personal correspondence clearly. Evelyn held it up to the light, catching fragments of words through the cheap paper. Pregnant, love you, forgive me. Everything she needed to know. Did you find what you needed? The coordinator asked. Yes, thank you. Evelyn slipped the letter smoothly into her briefcase between quarterly reports and meeting agendas. Just verifying our records are current. Later, in her corner office 40 stories above the city, Evelyn locked Kenya's letter in a file cabinet labeled Personnel Issues, archived. She told herself she was protecting the company's future, preventing a complication that could cost thousands of jobs if Kendrick's focus wavered during critical negotiations. The fact that she was stealing a woman's last words to the father of her child, that was just the cost of doing business at this level. The powerful had always made decisions for the powerless. At least this way, everyone could move forward cleanly. Gregory would never need to know the pregnancy had been disclosed. Kendrick would never know Kenya had tried to tell him. And Kenya would disappear into whatever new life she built, believing her silence had protected everyone. Clean, efficient, final. Evelyn returned to reviewing acquisition proposals, the letter already forgotten in the locked drawer where secrets went to die. Kenya packed her life into 2 suitcases, everything she couldn't bear to leave behind fitting into luggage borrowed from a neighbor. Her mother's picture from graduation. The notebook from ethics class with Kendrick's first note still folded inside. Her grandmother's pearls. The positive pregnancy test wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Evidence that this was real, that the sacrifice meant something. You don't have to do this, Lorraine said from the doorway. She was home from the hospital now, but still weak, supposed to be resting, yet mothers had radar for when their children were breaking. The job opportunity is too good to pass up, Kenya lied, repeating the story she'd carefully constructed. Assistant manager at a healthcare clinic in Austin. They're covering relocation costs, and I can finish my degree online while getting real experience. This is about that boy. The rich one you stopped mentioning. This is about building a future. Kenya couldn't meet her mother's eyes while lying. About opportunities I can't get here. Running away doesn't solve problems, baby girl. It just moves them to a different zip code. I'm not running, I'm surviving. Kenya finally looked up. Mama, you taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is know when to retreat, regroup, and fight another day. This is me retreating. Lorraine pulled her into a hug that said everything words couldn't. You're stronger than you know, but you don't always have to be strong alone. I know, Mama, but right now I do. Her brothers appeared suspicious and sad in equal measure. She told them about the job opportunity, made it sound exciting and positive, but they knew her too well. You're leaving because of him, aren't you? Her brother asked quietly, while the youngest wasn't listening. The guy you never talked about but stopped being happy after. I'm leaving because it's the right choice for everyone. That's not the same as it being a good choice. Kenya kissed his forehead instead of answering, because he was right and she couldn't admit it. The bus station at dawn was almost empty, just a handful of travelers and one young woman carrying 2 suitcases and a secret that would reshape her entire future. Kenya bought a ticket to Austin with cash, knowing credit cards left trails that private investigators could follow. As the city disappeared behind her through the grimy bus window, she placed a hand on her still flat stomach. It's just us now, she whispered to the collection of cells that would become Azariah. But we're going to be okay. We're going to be more than okay. I promise you that. The bus rolled south, carrying her toward a future she'd have to build alone, leaving behind the man she loved and the life they might have had if the world had been different. It took Kendrick 3 days to realize something was wrong. Kenya had been pulling away since the gala, their usual study sessions cancelled, her texts brief and increasingly infrequent. He'd assumed she needed space to process his father's behavior, time to decide if he was worth the complications his family brought. By day 5, concern replaced patience. Her phone went straight to voicemail, not rings then voicemail, but the immediate transfer that meant the number was disconnected. He went to Rosie's diner first, the place where she'd worked nights since freshman year. Haven't seen her in over a week, the manager said, barely looking up from inventory. She quit, said she had a family emergency, needed to leave town, gave her a final paycheck and that was it. Did she say where she was going? Nope, just that it was urgent and she couldn't give 2 weeks' notice. The manager finally looked at him, taking in his expensive coat and obvious distress. Look, kid, Kenya was a good worker, but she kept to herself, didn't share personal business. Whatever's going on, she clearly doesn't want to be found. The scholarship office was next, though dread built with each step. Miss Cole withdrew from the program, the administrator said carefully, her discomfort obvious. Personal reasons. She submitted all the proper paperwork, returned her university ID, and settled her accounts. As far as we're concerned, she's no longer enrolled. Where did she go? I'm not at liberty to share that information, even if I had it. Which I don't. She didn't provide a forwarding address. But she's okay? She's safe? As far as we know. The administrator's expression softened slightly. Mr. Vale, students leave programs all the time for various reasons. Sometimes the pressure is too much. Sometimes life circumstances change. It's not unusual. Everything about this was unusual. Kenya didn't quit. She didn't run. She fought through exhaustion and impossible schedules and every obstacle life threw at her with stubborn determination. Leaving without explanation wasn't just out of character, it was impossible. Unless she'd been forced. Unless his father's pressure had worked exactly as intended. Kendrick tried her apartment building next, but the landlord said she'd broken her lease, paid the penalty, and moved out completely. No forwarding address, no indication of where she'd gone. Her mother's workplace was his last hope. The building supervisor listened to his desperate questions with a weary expression. Lorraine Cole is on medical leave. She can't be disturbed, and even if she could, I doubt she'd talk to you about her daughter's whereabouts. The supervisor's tone carried judgment. That woman nearly killed herself working to put Kenya through school. If her daughter finally decided to focus on family instead of other priorities, that's probably for the best. The implication was clear. Kendrick was the other priority that had been appropriately discarded. Each dead end felt like another door slamming in his face, another confirmation that Kenya had chosen to leave, to cut him out of her life so completely that even finding her would be impossible. Evelyn Hart found him a week later in his father's office, staring out at the city like it might reveal Kenya's location if he looked hard enough. He'd barely slept, had missed classes, was running on coffee and desperation. She left the program, Evelyn said gently, setting a cup of coffee on the desk. Black, the way his father drank it, the way he'd been forcing himself to drink it since he was 16. I spoke. With the scholarship committee. She withdrew voluntarily, submitted all the proper exit paperwork. Why? She was doing brilliantly. She loved her classes. Did she? Evelyn's voice carried practiced sympathy. Or was she good at hiding how overwhelmed she was? Financial pressure, family obligations, the stress of trying to bridge two very different worlds. Sometimes people reach their breaking point. She would have talked to me. If she was struggling, she would have said something. Would she? Evelyn sat across from him, her expression kind but firm. You told me yourself she was proud, independent, determined to make it on her own. Maybe she decided that continuing in a situation where she'd always be compared to people with more resources, more advantages, more support systems. Maybe she decided it wasn't worth the constant struggle. She wouldn't just leave. Not without saying goodbye. Kendrick, I know this is painful, but sometimes people we think are permanent in our lives aren't. She had a difficult background, tremendous pressure, family responsibilities you and I can't fully understand. Perhaps she realized the gap between your worlds was too wide to bridge. Perhaps leaving on her own terms felt better than being pushed out by circumstances she couldn't control. My father pushed her out. His threats at the gala, your father expressed concerns, yes, but he didn't force her to leave. She made that choice herself. Evelyn's pause was perfectly timed, and perhaps that tells you something about how she truly felt. If she'd loved you enough, if she'd believed in what you had together, wouldn't she have fought? Wouldn't she have at least tried to make it work? The words landed like poison, seeping into Kendrick's wounded heart. Because hadn't he wondered the same thing? If Kenya truly loved him, wouldn't she be here, fighting beside him instead of disappearing without a trace? She's gone, Evelyn said softly, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is respect someone's choice to walk away, even when we don't understand it. Focus on your future, on building the company your father needs you to lead. Let her build whatever life she's chosen elsewhere. Alone that night in his apartment, Kendrick constructed his own narrative from the pieces left behind. Kenya had seen his weakness at the gala, watched him let his father pull him away, instead of standing beside her publicly. She'd heard Gregory's dismissive words about scholarship students and temporary romances, and she decided he wasn't worth the fight. She'd left without a word, because words would have required him to choose, and she'd already concluded he'd choose his father's approval over her love. The rejection burned worse than any business failure. He'd offered her his heart, not his money, not his name, just his heart, and she'd decided it wasn't enough to compensate for the complications his family brought. I was stupid to think love could change the script written for my life, he told his reflection, practicing the cynicism that would become his armor. But even as he built walls around the wound Kenya had left, he couldn't bring himself to throw away the folded campus map with her first note. He tucked it in his wallet behind his credit cards, where it would live for the next 5 years like a splinter too deep to extract. The conference room at Vale Global Tower stretched out before him, floor-to-ceiling windows displaying the city like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Kendrick sat at the mahogany table just 3 weeks after Kenya's disappearance, reviewing contracts for a major acquisition his father had been negotiating for months. The numbers should have thrilled him. His first real involvement in a deal worth hundreds of millions, proof that Gregory was finally taking him seriously as a future leader of the company. Instead, he found himself thinking about Tuesday nights in the library, about the way Kenya would tap her pen against her lips when she was concentrating, about her laugh when he'd finally admitted he hated coffee but drank it anyway to seem more like his father. "You're distracted," Gregory observed from the doorway, his tone carrying disappointment rather than concern. "Just reviewing the terms carefully. You've been reviewing the same page for 10 minutes. Gregory entered, closing the door behind him. "She's gone, Kendrick. You need to accept that and move forward. Did you know she was leaving?" "I knew she was intelligent enough to recognize an untenable situation when she saw one." Gregory's voice held no triumph, just matter-of-fact satisfaction. "You'll thank me one day. When you're married to someone suitable, running the company with a clear head, you'll understand that some people are meant to be chapters, not entire books." She wasn't a chapter. She was. Kendrick stopped himself, unable to find words adequate to describe what Kenya had been. The only person who'd ever seen him as just Kendrick. The only relationship that had felt real instead of transactional. She was a learning experience, Gregory finished. And now you've learned. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can focus on what actually matters. That night, Kendrick stood at his apartment window, watching the city lights blur through a rain that matched his mood. Somewhere out there, Kenya was building a new life without him. She'd chosen to leave rather than fight for what they had, and he had to accept that her choice meant something about how she truly felt, or how little she'd felt. He pulled out the folded map, traced her handwriting with his finger. "You're late to the right place." Except maybe he'd been in the wrong place all along. Maybe the right place was just a moment, not a destination, a temporary intersection where two incompatible worlds had briefly touched before reality pulled them apart. He wanted to be angry. Anger would be easier than this hollow ache, this sense that the best part of himself had walked away and left him with just the parts his father had always wanted: ambitious, focused, empty. The campus map went back into his wallet, tucked behind credit cards and his driver's license. He couldn't throw it away, couldn't quite let go, even though holding on served no purpose except to remind him of what he'd lost. Days became weeks, became months. Kendrick threw himself into Vale Global with the dedication his father had always demanded. He attended board meetings, studied quarterly reports, shadowed executives through negotiations. He learned to read balance sheets the way some people read novels, to see market trends before they fully emerged, to make decisions that affected thousands of employees with the same detachment his father wielded. He went on dates arranged by well-meaning friends and deliberately orchestrated by his father, lawyers, entrepreneurs, a senator's daughter who looked perfect on paper and felt like absolutely nothing in person. They were all accomplished, intelligent, and suitable, and they all felt like substitutes for something real he'd had once and foolishly lost. "You're not even trying," complained one woman after their third date, when it became clear he was going through motions rather than actually engaging. "You're physically here but mentally somewhere else." She was right. Part of him was still in that library corner, still walking Kenya to bus stops, still believing that connection mattered more than compatibility on paper. But that part was shrinking, calcifying, being replaced by the heir Gregory had always wanted him to become: focused, driven, alone in all the ways that mattered. He stopped checking his email hoping for a message from her, stopped scanning crowds for her face, stopped imagining conversations where she explained everything and he understood, and they found a way back to each other. Instead, he became exactly what circumstances demanded: successful, powerful, and utterly hollow where Kenya Cole used to live. 6 months after she'd disappeared, Kendrick negotiated his first major deal independently, an acquisition that would expand Vale Global's reach into 3 new markets. His father actually smiled, the closest thing to approval Kendrick had ever received. "Now you're thinking clearly," Gregory said. "Now you're ready to lead." Kendrick accepted the praise with the same emptiness he felt about everything lately. Ready to lead, ready to succeed, ready to become the kind of man who'd let the best thing in his life walk away without fighting hard enough to make her stay. The transformation was complete. Kenya Cole had left, and in her absence, Kendrick Vale had finally become his father's son. A year passed. Then, too, Kendrick rose through Vale Global's ranks with methodical efficiency, earning respect from the board, grudging admiration from competitors, and absolutely nothing that felt like genuine connection. He dated occasionally, relationships that lasted a few months before dissolving into mutual disinterest. He attended galas and charity events, shook hands with politicians and executives, smiled for cameras that captured a man who looked successful and felt nothing. Therapists. He tried 3 before giving up. Asked variations of the same question: "What are you afraid of?" The answer was simple and impossible to articulate. He was afraid that Kenya had been his one chance at something real, and he'd let her slip away, that he'd spend the rest of his life achieving everything his father wanted while losing everything he'd actually needed. But admitting that meant admitting he'd failed at the most important thing, so instead, he said he was fine, just busy, just focused on building the company. The therapists nodded and took notes, and eventually suggested he was processing a developmental stage rather than genuine loss. Only one moment threatened to break his carefully constructed armor. 3 years after Kenya's disappearance, he was reviewing funding proposals for Vale Global's new philanthropic foundation, a pet project he'd insisted on over his father's objections. One proposal caught his attention: Eastview Community Clinic, requesting funding for pediatric respiratory equipment and medications for low-income families. He approved it immediately, along with 11 others serving communities like the one Kenya had grown up in, scholarships for single parents, job training programs, medical clinics, housing assistance. "You're trying to save the world one charity case at a time," Gregory observed during a board meeting where Kendrick defended the foundation's budget. "No," Kendrick replied, thinking of Kenya's fierce independence, her refusal to be anyone's charity. "I'm trying to create a world where people don't need saving, where working 3 jobs isn't the only way to survive, where choosing between education and feeding your family isn't necessary. And this obsession with the poor has nothing to do with that girl. Everything I do has something to do with her," Kendrick admitted, surprising himself with honesty. "She showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you do. The least I can do is make sure people like her have something softer to land on." Gregory shook his head, but didn't argue further. The foundation was a relatively small line item in Vale Global's budget, and if it kept Kendrick engaged and productive, it was worth the expense. What Gregory didn't know, what Kendrick barely admitted to himself, was that every clinic funded, every scholarship awarded, every family helped, was a prayer sent into the void. Not that Kenya would see his work and come back, but that somehow, somewhere, she'd know he'd become better than the boy who'd let his father pull him away from her at a gala. That he'd learned the lessons she'd tried to teach him, even if he'd learned them too late. 5 years after Kenya disappeared, Kendrick Vale sat in a board meeting approving the acquisition of a competitor, wielding power his younger self would have found intoxicating. He was 37, successful beyond most people's dreams, engaged to Miranda Cross, a merger his father had orchestrated that looked perfect in press releases and felt like settling in every private moment. The engagement was practical. Miranda understood the demands of his position, expected nothing he couldn't give, wanted a partnership more than a romance. It was exactly what someone in his position should want. So why did he still carry that folded campus map in his wallet, 5 years after the woman who'd written on it had walked away without looking back? His phone buzzed during the meeting, a notification from the foundation about Eastview Community Clinic's expanded services, now helping over 300 families monthly. He felt the familiar hollow satisfaction of impact without connection. Somewhere in the world, Kenya Cole was living a life he knew nothing about. Maybe she was happy. Maybe she'd found someone who fought harder for her than he had. Maybe she'd achieved everything she'd been working toward when they met in ethics class a lifetime ago. He hoped so. Even as the hoping hurt, he genuinely hoped she'd found the happiness she deserved. But late at night, when defenses were low and honesty was unavoidable, Kendrick allowed himself to wonder if he could go back to that gala. Knowing what he knew now, would he have the courage to stand beside her publicly? To choose her over his father's approval, her love over the company's expectations? He wanted to believe he would, but the man staring back from his apartment window, successful, powerful, engaged to someone suitable, suggested otherwise. Some people were just meant to be chapters, his father had said, but what Gregory hadn't understood was that some chapters changed the entire story even after they ended. Especially after they ended. Kenya Cole had been Kendrick Vale's chapter, and every page that followed was written in the shadow of what they'd lost. The apartment in Austin measured 600 square feet, 1 bedroom, windows that faced a brick wall, pipes that clanged like ghosts at midnight. Kenya signed the lease 7 months pregnant, her signature shaking slightly as she wrote her new name, K. Coleman. Different enough to avoid easy searches, close enough to remember who she was. Azariah came into the world at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, screaming with her father's determination and her mother's refusal to be ignored. The nurses laid her on Kenya's chest, and in that moment every sacrifice crystallized into purpose. "Look at you," Kenya whispered, studying the face that was unmistakably Kendrick's. The same curved nose, the same stubborn chin, those eyes that would eventually turn from newborn blue to brown with gold flecks. "You may not have a father present, but you will never, ever lack love. That's my promise to you." The birth certificate listed father, unknown. The lie sat heavy in Kenya's chest, but the truth was, a luxury single mothers couldn't always afford. She'd tell Azariah something when she was old enough to ask, something true but incomplete, protecting her daughter from the complicated reality of being unwanted by half her DNA. Except Azariah wasn't unwanted. She was unknown. There was a difference Kenya would have to pass when her daughter was old enough to understand nuance. For now, she focused on survival. The grocery store hired her when Azariah was 3 months old. Kenya worked the produce section, 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., racing home to relieve the neighbor who watched the baby for $10 a day plus groceries. Evenings meant call center work from home, technical support for people who'd forgotten passwords and took out their frustration on whoever answered the phone. "Have you tried turning it off and back on?" Kenya said for the 100th time that week, her voice professionally pleasant while Azariah slept in a bouncer beside the desk. "Yes, I understand that's frustrating. Let me walk you through the next steps." Community college classes happened online after midnight, Kenya fighting exhaustion while studying for her medical assistant certification. The textbooks were PDFs downloaded from questionable sites because legitimate copies cost more than a week's groceries. She'd prop Azariah against her chest when the baby was restless, the tiny warmth keeping her awake while she memorized anatomy terms and medication protocols. "We're building something, baby girl," she'd whisper during those late-night study sessions. "Brick by brick, we're building something better than what we have now." Sleep became theoretical, something other people did in solid blocks rather than snatched in 90-minute intervals between feeding schedules and work shifts and homework deadlines. Kenya learned to function for 4 hours total, to fall asleep standing in the shower, to dream about rest the way other people dreamed about wealth. But every morning, Azariah's smile made it worth continuing. Every milestone, first word, first step, first time sleeping through the night, felt like evidence that they'd survive this impossible juggling act. Kenya's mother called weekly, worried and proud in equal measure. The story about the assistant manager position at a healthcare clinic had evolved into working my way up while finishing my degree online. Not quite lies, but not quite true either. "Your brothers miss you," Lorraine said during one call. "They ask when you're coming to visit. Soon, Mama. Once I get more established here." Another lie. Kenya couldn't risk returning, couldn't change Gregory Vale's people tracking her back to Austin if they saw her in her hometown. "You're running from something," Lorraine said quietly, "or someone. When you're ready to tell me the truth, I'll be here." Kenya changed the subject, asked about her brother's grades, deflected with questions about Lorraine's health. The medical bills from her mother's collapse had been mysteriously paid. Kenya suspected Kendrick's doing, some anonymous donation through the hospital's charity fund. She was grateful and resentful in equal measure, hating that she needed help while desperately needing exactly that. The first serious infection hit when Azariah was 18 months old. What started as a cold became a wheeze, became a 2 a.m. panic when Kenya realized her daughter couldn't catch her breath. The 911 call, the ambulance ride, the terror of watching doctors swarm her baby with oxygen masks and monitors. It crystallized every fear Kenya had about doing this alone. Reactive airway disease, the emergency room doctor explained, his tone professionally compassionate. Common in young children, especially those with family history of asthma or allergies. Her airways are hyperreactive. They overrespond to triggers like respiratory infections. Will she outgrow it? Some children do. Others develop chronic asthma, Right now we focus on management, preventive medications, rescue treatments, avoiding triggers when possible. Kenya learned a new vocabulary that night: nebulizers and peak flow meters, albuterol and corticosteroids, oxygen saturation levels, and respiratory distress protocols. She learned to recognize the subtle wheeze that preceded the crisis, to stay calm when her daughter couldn't breathe, because panic was contagious and air was precious. Eastview Community Clinic became their second home. Dr. Meera Patel, a pediatrician who'd given up private practice to serve communities that couldn't afford specialists, became Kenya's lifeline and Azariah's advocate. Her lungs are sensitive, Dr. Patel explained during a follow-up visit, Azariah playing with a stethoscope while they talked. Think of them as overreactive security guards. They see a small threat and respond like it's an invasion. With proper management, she can live a completely normal life. What does proper management cost? Kenya asked, already calculating whether she could afford another medication on top of the two Azariah already took daily. Dr. Patel's expression softened with understanding. The clinic has a prescription assistance program. Thanks to some foundation grants, we can provide medications at cost or sometimes free for families who qualify. You'd qualify, Kenya. Let me get you the paperwork. Kenya filled out forms while Azariah played, swallowing pride because her daughter's ability to breathe mattered more than her own discomfort with accepting help. The assistance program covered both preventive and rescue medications, reducing her monthly costs from $300 to $40. She never asked which foundation funded the program. If she had, she might have seen the name Vail Global Foundation on the grant documentation. Might have realized that Kendrick's money was keeping their daughter healthy, his philanthropic work creating the safety net that made her survival possible. But Kenya was too busy surviving to investigate donor lists. She accepted the help, memorized medication schedules, and learned to sleep with one ear always tuned to Azariah's breathing. Tasha Monroe crashed into Kenya's life like sunshine through storm clouds during her second year in Austin. They met at the call center, Tasha in the next cubicle, her laugh too loud for the corporate environment, her spirit too bright for the soul-crushing monotony of password resets and angry customers. "You need to eat something besides those sad crackers," Tasha announced one day, sliding half her sandwich onto Kenya's desk. "And before you say you're not hungry, I can literally hear your stomach growling through the cubicle wall." "I'm fine." "You're about to pass out. Eat the sandwich. It's turkey and Swiss, nothing fancy, but it's actual food." They became friends gradually, then suddenly. Tasha babysat when Kenya had exams, brought soup when Azariah was sick, forced Kenya to laugh when exhaustion made everything feel impossible. "That baby is 4 years old and has never seen you on a date," Tasha observed one evening, watching Kenya decline a co-worker's invitation to coffee. "I don't have time to date." "You don't make time. There's a difference." Tasha's voice softened. "Kenya, I've known you for 2 years, and you've never mentioned Azariah's father. Not once. That's either the healthiest separation in history, or you're carrying damage you won't let heal. It's complicated. Life is complicated. That's not an excuse to stop living it." Tasha leaned against the cubicle wall, studying her friend with concern. "You've built walls so high even good things can't climb over them. Just because one man hurt you doesn't mean every good thing will too." "He didn't hurt me," Kenya said quietly, surprising herself with the defense. "The situation hurt us both. He never knew about Azariah. I left before he could know. Why? Because his father had the power to destroy my family, and staying would have forced Kendrick to choose between me and everything he'd been raised to become. I loved him enough to not make him make that choice." Tasha was quiet for a long moment. "That's either the most selfless thing I've ever heard, or the most self-sabotaging? Haven't decided which. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Because selflessness means you protect everyone. Self-sabotaging means you convinced yourself you weren't worth fighting for and made the decision for both of you. Tasha's expression was gentle but challenging. Which one was it, Kenya? The question haunted Kenya long after their shift ended, long after she'd put Azariah to bed and sat alone in the darkness of their small apartment. Had she protected Kendrick, or had she decided for him that she wasn't worth the fight? Had she been brave or just afraid that if given the choice, he'd have chosen his father's approval over her love? She'd never know, and not knowing was safer than finding out she'd been right to leave. The clinic's waiting room was always packed, families like hers seeking care they could afford. Kenya rushed through it twice a month for Azariah's checkups and medication refills, focused on appointment times and managing her daughter's anxiety about doctor visits. The donor plaques on the walls were part of the background, the way you notice furniture, present but unremarkable. If Kenya had stopped to read them, she would have seen it, a brass plate beside the entrance, weathered but readable. Eastview Community Clinic. Pediatric Services Wing, supported by the Vail Global Foundation, bringing quality healthcare to communities in need. But she never stopped. Never read the names of corporations that funded the sliding scale fees, never investigated which foundation grants covered the medication assistance program that kept Azariah healthy. Dr. Patel mentioned it once, offhandedly, while reviewing Azariah's treatment plan. We're lucky to have foundation support. The Vail Global Grant covers our specialized equipment, our medication assistance program, even some of our staff salaries. Without it, we'd have closed 3 years ago. That's wonderful, Kenya murmured, filling out insurance paperwork, her mind on the grocery list and the shift she had to cover that evening. The name Vail didn't register as significant. It was a common enough surname, and her brain had learned to protect her by not making connections to a past she couldn't afford to revisit. So she remained unaware that Kendrick's money paid for Azariah's inhalers, that his foundation funded the nebulizer treatments, that his philanthropic work, born from guilt and lessons she'd taught him, was the invisible thread keeping their daughter breathing. The universe had its own sense of irony, weaving their lives together with invisible thread, each unaware of the other's proximity in the grand design. Vail Global's boardroom hadn't changed in 5 years. Same mahogany table, same leather chairs, same oil paintings of previous CEOs, watching from walls like judges of an eternal court. What had changed was Kendrick's place at it. No longer the heir apparent shadowing his father, he now commanded his own division. At 32, he was the youngest executive vice president in company history, his innovations in secure communications technology increasing efficiency by 37%, and profitability by margins that made even skeptical board members take notice. The quarterly reports are impressive, Gregory admitted during a strategic planning session, sliding documents across the table. Your encryption protocols have attracted interest from 3 governments and 12 Fortune 500 companies. Martin Hayes, CFO, and Gregory's oldest friend, frowned. Are a drain on resources. Every dollar spent on free clinics and scholarships is a dollar not returned to shareholders. Every dollar spent on communities is an investment in future consumers, future employees, future market stability, Kendrick countered. He'd had this argument so many times he could deliver it in his sleep. Companies that ignore social responsibility don't survive generational transitions. Consumer loyalty increasingly depends on corporate citizenship. Careful, Gregory warned. You're starting to sound like those idealists at university. Don't let sentiment cloud business judgment. But sentiment was exactly what Kendrick was fighting to preserve, the last piece of himself that remembered Kenya's voice saying, "You don't have to outdo your father. You just have to be you." He'd failed her in most ways that mattered, but he could honor what she taught him by using his position to create the kind of world where people like her didn't have to choose between love and survival. The foundation expanded yearly, 12 clinics now, including Eastview, scholarships for single parents, job training programs, housing assistance. Each initiative was carefully researched, strategically implemented, and personally overseen by Kendrick, despite his father's barely concealed disapproval. "You can't save everyone," Gregory said after one particularly heated board meeting. The therapist's office was deliberately neutral. Beige walls, abstract art that meant nothing, a white noise machine that sounded like distant static. Kendrick had started sessions 8 months ago, when the insomnia became unbearable and the engagement to Miranda felt more like surrender than partnership. "Tell me about her again," Dr. Williams said, pen poised over his notepad. "The woman you can't seem to move past, Kenya." Her name still felt like prayer and pain combined. She was real. In a world of performance and pretense, she was completely, unflinchingly real, and she left. Without explanation, without goodbye, just gone. "How does that make you feel?" Kendrick laughed bitterly. "Like I failed some test I didn't know I was taking, like I wasn't worth even an explanation, like everything I thought we had was one-sided and I was too stupid to see it. Or perhaps," Dr. Williams suggested gently, "like she was protecting you from something. People rarely disappear without reason, Mr. Vale. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. That's poetic, but it doesn't make the nights any shorter." Kendrick stared out the window at the city spread below. "I am engaged to someone suitable. I run a division worth billions. I should be satisfied. Should be. But are you?" "No." The admission came quietly. "I feel like I'm performing a role in someone else's story. Like the real me died when she left, and what's left is just a very successful shell." Dr. Williams made a note. "Have you considered that perhaps you need closure? That finding her, getting answers, might allow you to move forward?" "I hired investigators. They found nothing. She's either very good at disappearing or very determined to stay gone. Either way, the message is clear." "Is it? Or is that the story you're telling yourself to avoid dealing with the possibility that circumstances separated you, not choice?" Kendrick didn't answer because engaging with that possibility meant admitting he'd given up too easily, accepted his father's narrative too readily, let the woman he loved disappear without fighting nearly hard enough to find her. The private investigator came recommended by a colleague who'd used him for corporate intelligence. Nathan Webb was discreet, professional, and expensive. All qualities Kendrick needed for a search he couldn't let his father discover. "I don't want her found," Kendrick clarified during their first meeting in a coffee shop far from Vale Global's offices. "I just want to know she's okay. That she's safe, stable, not in trouble." Webb nodded, taking notes. "Any starting points?" "She left the university 5 years ago, changed her phone number, moved out of state based on what little I could gather. Her family won't talk to me. I tried reaching out through intermediaries, but they either don't know where she is or won't say family name." "Cole." "Mother is Lorraine Cole and worked for a commercial cleaning company. 2 younger brothers would be teenagers now. The last known address was in the East District. Any reason she'd disappear so thoroughly?" Kendrick hesitated. "My father didn't approve of our relationship. He's influential. There may have been pressure applied that I wasn't aware of at the time." Webb's expression remained neutral, but Kendrick saw understanding there. Money and power created casualties most people never saw. 3 months later, Webb returned with frustratingly little information and a bill for $8,000. "She's thorough," Webb said, spreading what he'd found across the table, which amounted to almost nothing. "She left town within a week of withdrawing from university. No forwarding address, no social media presence under her name or likely variations. She's using cash for most transactions or has changed her name legally. Her mother still works for the same cleaning company, but has a privacy block on her address and phone. The brothers are in high school, both doing well academically, but family information is locked down tight. Could you find her with more aggressive methods? Probably, but it would require tactics that might alert her or her family that someone's looking. Surveillance, interviewing former employers, credit checks under various names. It crosses lines you said you didn't want to cross. Kendrick thought of Kenya's fierce independence, her insistence on making her own choices. If she'd gone to this much trouble to disappear, she had reasons. Forcing his way back into her life would violate everything he'd claimed to love about her. Just tell me if you find any indication she's in trouble, he said finally. Medical emergencies, financial crisis, anything that suggests she needs help. Otherwise, let her be. You're sure? No, but it's the right thing to do. Webb packed up his minimal findings and left, and Kendrick was alone with the confirmation that Kenya was gone in every way that mattered. She'd built a new life somewhere, possibly under a new name, and she didn't want to be found. He had to respect that. Even though respecting it was killing him slowly, the foundation became Kendrick's quiet rebellion, his way of honoring what Kenya had taught him about responsibility, privilege, and the invisible barriers that kept people trapped in circumstances they hadn't chosen. Every board meeting where Gregory pushed for higher profits, Kendrick pushed back with foundation initiatives. Every shareholder presentation, where cost-cutting was proposed, community clinic, he defended one programs they funded communities like the one Kenya because it served the kind of neighborhood where working 3 jobs was normal, and choosing between healthcare and groceries was a monthly decision. The pediatric wing expansion, the medication assistance program, the sliding scale fees, all funded by grants Kendrick personally approved. He'd never been to Eastview, never met Dr. Patel, or seen the families his money helped. But every quarterly report showing lives improved felt like a prayer sent to wherever Kenya had gone. I learned. I'm better. I'm trying to be worthy of what you tried to teach me. The scholarship program prioritized single parents, especially mothers trying to complete their education while raising children alone. The job training initiatives focused on practical certifications, medical assistant programs, technical skills, paths to stable employment that didn't require 4-year degrees. You're trying to save the world one charity case at a time, Gregory observed during one particularly heated discussion about foundation funding. No, Kendrick replied, thinking of Kenya's fierce independence, her refusal to be anyone's charity. I'm trying to create a world where people don't need saving, where working 3 jobs isn't the only way to survive, where choosing between education and feeding your family isn't necessary, where loving someone from a different economic class doesn't require choosing between that love and your entire family's future. And this obsession with the poor has nothing to do with that girl. Everything I do has something to do with her, Kendrick admitted. She showed me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time you do. That dignity doesn't come from what you have, but from how you treat people who have less. The least I can do is make sure people like her have something softer to land on when life knocks them down. Gregory shook his head, but stopped arguing. The foundation was a fraction of Vail Global's budget, and if it kept Kendrick engaged and productive while making the company look good in press releases, it was worth the expense. What Gregory didn't know, what Kendrick barely admitted to himself, was that every clinic funded, every scholarship awarded, every family helped, was an apology sent into the void. Not for Kenya to receive, but for him to live with. I'm sorry I let my father pull me away at that gala. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to choose you when it mattered. The foundation couldn't fix his failures, but it could honor the lessons learned from them. If you notice how life is quietly weaving these 2 lives together, drop destiny in the comments. And if you believe in second chances and unseen protection, share this video with one person who needs to remember that their story isn't over yet. In Austin, Kenya rushed through Eastview Community Clinic's waiting room, late for Azariah's appointment, juggling work schedule and medication refills, and the constant calculation of survival. In the city she'd fled 5 years ago, Kendrick approved another round of foundation grants, Eastview Community Clinic prominently on the list, unaware that the child receiving nebulizer treatments there shared his DNA. The foundation's reach grew yearly, touching lives Kendrick would never know about, including a small apartment where a mother checked her daughter's breathing each night, grateful for medications she could afford because of a program she'd never traced to its source. 5 years had passed. 5 years of parallel lives, of growth and pain and lessons learned the hardest way possible. 5 years of a child growing to look more like her father each day, while that father built monuments to a love he'd lost. The threads were drawing tighter, pulled by forces neither could see, setting the stage for a reunion that would shatter and remake both their worlds. In the darkness of their separate bedrooms, hundreds of miles apart, both Kenya and Kendrick sometimes woke at the same moment, 3:47 a.m., the exact time Azariah had been born. Kenya would check on her daughter. Kendrick would check his phone for messages that never came, both wondering if somewhere, somehow, the other remembered too. The universe was writing a story they couldn't yet see, arranging pieces on a board they didn't know they were playing on, preparing for the night when wrong cars and desperate prayers would bring them face to face with everything they'd lost and everything they might still save. The evening had started normally, almost peacefully. Kenya sat cross-legged on their worn carpet, helping Azariah color in a princess coloring book they'd found at the dollar store. Dinner simmered on the stove, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, garlic bread made from day-old bread and margarine. "Mama, can I use the purple for her dress?" Azariah asked, holding up a stubby crayon worn down from months of use. "Baby, you can use any color you want. That's the beautiful thing about art. There are no wrong choices." Azariah smiled, revealing the gap where her first tooth had fallen out last month. Then she coughed, a small dry sound that immediately triggered Kenya's maternal radar, the warning system she'd developed over 4 years of managing her daughter's reactive airways. "You okay, sweetheart?" "My throat tickles." Kenya pressed her lips to Azariah's forehead, the thermometer of mothers everywhere. Warm but not alarming yet. "Let's finish coloring, then I'll get you some water and check your temperature properly." But 30 minutes later, it became warm. The thermometer read 101.3 degrees. The cough had deepened, rattling in Azariah's chest like coins in a jar. Her breathing took on that quality Kenya had learned to fear, shallow, rapid, with a wheeze on the exhale that meant her airways were tightening. "Okay, baby, we need to do your breathing treatment." Kenya pulled out the nebulizer, the machine she'd hoped they wouldn't need this month. Each treatment meant medication costs, meant her daughter was struggling, meant the careful balance of health management was tipping toward crisis. Azariah's little face crumpled. She hated the mask, hated sitting still for 10 minutes while medicated mist filled her lungs, hated the whole process even though she understood it helped. I know, but it helps you breathe, remember? Just like we practiced with your stuffed animals." Azariah endured the treatment with tears streaming down her face, and Kenya's heart broke the way it always did when she had to enforce something her daughter hated for her own good. Motherhood was full of these moments, choosing the necessary over the comfortable, the healthy over the easy. But when the treatment finished, the wheezing hadn't improved. If anything, Azariah's breathing had become more labored, each breath a visible effort. Kenya pulled out the pulse oximeter and clipped it to Azariah's finger, watching the numbers that would tell her whether this was manageable at home or required emergency intervention. 92%. Normally, Azariah sat at 98 or 99%. 92 meant her lungs weren't getting enough oxygen to her blood, meaning the infection or trigger or whatever was causing this episode was winning. Kenya called the Eastview Clinic's emergency line, hands shaking as she dialed. Eastview Community Clinic After Hours line. This is Nurse Rodriguez. This is Kenya Coleman. My daughter Azariah is a patient of Dr. Patel's. She has reactive airway disease, and she's having an episode that's not responding to her home treatments. What's her oxygen saturation? 92%. It's usually 98. And her breathing? Are you seeing retractions? Kenya watched Azariah's chest, seeing the skin pull in sharply between her ribs with each labored breath. Yes, visible retractions, and she's working hard to breathe. Kenya, you need to get her to the emergency room. Her lungs need help we can't provide over the phone. Do you have transportation? The ambulance would cost $800 minimum. Kenya had learned this the hard way during Azariah's first serious episode. $800 she didn't have, couldn't borrow, wouldn't see coming back, even if insurance eventually covered part of it. Her checking account currently held $47.32. Payday was Friday, 3 days away. She'd already calculated that they could survive on crackers and eggs until then, if she was careful. $800 was impossible. But $60 for a rideshare to the hospital? That she could manage, barely, if she put it on the credit card she only used for true emergencies. And Azariah, struggling to breathe, definitely qualified as a true emergency. Kenya opened 3 rideshare apps, fingers shaking as she typed in their address and Eastview Medical Center's emergency entrance. The storm had driven prices up. Surge pricing that tripled normal costs. What would usually cost $20 now cost $63. She selected the fastest option, watching the screen, finding your driver. 5 minutes passed. 10. Azariah's breathing grew worse, each inhale accompanied by a sound like whistling that meant her airways were closing further. Kenya refreshed the app. It crashed. She tried another service. Same spinning wheel of false promise. "Come on, come on, come on," she whispered, bouncing Azariah gently, trying to keep her calm because panic made breathing harder, and they couldn't afford panic right now. The second app finally connected. Driver found. Arriving in 8 minutes. 8 minutes felt like hours while watching your child struggle for air, but it was better than nothing. Kenya grabbed their emergency bag, always packed with insurance cards, Azariah's medication list, a change of clothes, the medical history summary Dr. Patel had helped her create. She wrapped Azariah in a cardigan that was too thin for November, but all they had. "We're going to the hospital, baby. They're going to help you breathe better." "I don't want to go to the hospital," Azariah said between labored breaths. "Hospitals are scary, I know, but the doctors there are really good at helping kids breathe. Remember Dr. Martinez from last time? She was nice, right?" Azariah nodded, though her expression remained frightened. She understood hospitals meant she was really sick, meant needles and machines and scary sounds. Kenya's phone buzzed. "Driver arriving in 2 minutes." She hoisted Azariah onto her hip, grabbed the emergency bag, and headed for the door just as the sky opened up and rain began hammering their building like it was angry at the world. Rain hit them the moment they stepped outside, cold and violent, soaking through Kenya's thin jacket in seconds. The apartment building's security light flickered, casting strange shadows across the parking lot that made everything look uncertain and threatening. Kenya's phone buzzed again. "Driver is here." But through the downpour, she could barely see beyond a few feet. Water streamed down her face, plastering her hair to her head, making it nearly impossible to see clearly. Then she spotted it. A dark sedan at the curb, engine running, headlights cutting through the rain. Refuge from the storm. Help for Azariah. "Miss Cole?" A voice called from somewhere near the car, barely audible over the rain. Kenya didn't hesitate. She rushed toward the vehicle, yanked the back door open, and slid inside with Azariah, grateful for warmth and shelter and the chance to get her daughter to help. only after settling Azariah against her chest, only after her breathing slowed from the panic of running through the rain, only after the door closed behind them, did Kenya register details that didn't fit: the expensive leather seats, the subtle interior lighting, the cologne that smelled like memories she'd spent 5 years trying to bury. "Eastview Medical Center, please," she said urgently, adjusting Azariah's position to help her breathe, water dripping from both of them onto seats that were definitely too nice for a rideshare vehicle. "The pediatric emergency entrance. My daughter can't breathe properly." That's when she noticed the shadow in the corner of the back seat. The man turned, and Kenya's world fractured. Kendrick, 5 years older, 5 years more polished, wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. But unmistakably him. The same eyes that had once looked at her like she was his entire universe. The same face she saw every time she looked at their daughter. "Kenya?" Her name and his voice hit like an electric shock. Every carefully constructed wall, every defense mechanism, every plan for what she'd do if she ever saw him again. All of it evaporated in the space between heartbeats. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not like this. Not with Azariah struggling to breathe and her clothes soaked through and 5 years of secrets about to explode in the back of what was apparently his car, not her rideshare. Wrong car. She'd gotten into the wrong car. "Kendrick, I'm sorry, this is a mistake." Azariah chose that moment to cough, a harsh barking sound that cut through Kenya's shock and Kendrick's stunned recognition. The little girl's breathing deteriorated further, the wheeze becoming more pronounced, her small chest heaving with the effort of drawing air. "Driver, Eastview Medical Center. Pediatric emergency entrance. Now." Kendrick's voice cut through everything. Sharp, authoritative, the tone of someone used to being obeyed instantly. The car surged forward before Kenya could protest, before she could demand to be let out, before she could do anything except hold Azariah and try to keep breathing herself, because this was impossible. This was her worst nightmare. This was... "When did the fever start?" Kendrick asked, and Kenya heard his CEO voice, the analytical mind that could compartmentalize crises and address immediate problems before dealing with emotional complications. Part of her wanted to refuse to answer, wanted to maintain some dignity in this humiliating situation. But Azariah's wheezing was getting worse, and pride didn't help children breathe. "This afternoon. She was fine this morning." Kenya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Fever spiked about 2 hours ago. She's had breathing problems before, but never like this." She was acutely aware of how she must look, soaked through in her grocery store uniform, the one with the stain on the collar she'd never been able to completely remove. Her hair plastered to her face, a cheap phone with its cracked screen visible in her jacket pocket. Water dripping onto leather seats that were probably worth more than everything she owned. This wasn't how she'd imagined seeing him again. In her rare fantasies she'd been successful, polished, standing on equal ground. Not desperate and drenched with her daughter's illness the only thing keeping her from bolting from the car. Kendrick's brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. Kenya. Here. After 5 years of silence, 5 years of private investigators finding nothing, 5 years of building walls around the wound she'd left, she'd materialized in his car like an answer to prayers he'd stopped saying out loud. She looked different. Thinner, with worry lines around her eyes that spoke of exhaustion and struggle. Her clothes were worn, practical, the uniform of someone working service jobs to survive. The phone in her pocket was several generations old, screen cracked, held together with a case that had seen better days. But she was still Kenya, still carrying herself with that fierce dignity he'd fallen in love with, still refusing to ask him for anything beyond this ride, even though she clearly needed so much more. Then his attention shifted fully to the child in her arms, a little girl, maybe 4 years old, struggling to breathe with a wheeze he could hear even over the rain hammering the car roof. Kenya held her with practiced urgency. This wasn't the first medical crisis, wouldn't be the last. The protective way she cradled the child's head, the automatic adjustments to help her lungs expand, the whispered comfort. This was a mother who knew her child's medical needs intimately. But it was the child's features that made his breath catch. Even in distress, even with fever flushing her cheeks, the resemblance was undeniable. The shape of her nose, his nose. The curve of her fingers where they gripped Kenya's jacket, his hands in miniature. That stubborn chin he saw in the mirror every morning. How old is she? The question emerged before his conscious mind fully processed the implications. 4 years old. Kenya had disappeared 5 years ago. The math wasn't just suggestive, it was screaming. But a child was struggling to breathe in front of him, and whether she was his or not could wait until she was safe. Everything else could wait until she was safe. "Does she have any allergies?" Kendrick asked, forcing his mind into the analytical space where he functioned best under pressure. "Any medications she's currently taking?" Kenya rattled off the list: albuterol, montelukast, a rescue inhaler for emergencies. Medical terminology that told him this child had chronic respiratory issues, that Kenya had become fluent in a language no parent wanted to learn. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Why did you leave? Where have you been? Is she mine? But those questions were selfish when weighed against a child who couldn't breathe properly. Kendrick leaned forward, studying the little girl more closely. Her breathing was visibly labored, skin pulling between her ribs with each inhale. He'd seen enough medical briefings during foundation work to recognize serious respiratory distress. How often does this happen? Bad episodes? 3, maybe 4 times a year. Kenya's voice was tight with controlled fear. Usually we catch it earlier, manage it at home, but tonight the fever came on so fast and I couldn't. She stopped herself, visibly pulling her composure back together. Showing weakness in front of him clearly felt dangerous, like giving him ammunition in a battle she thought they'd be fighting. But Kendrick wasn't interested in battles. He was interested in the child, possibly his child, getting the help she needed. "You're doing everything right," he said quietly, meaning it. "She's lucky to have you." The unexpected kindness seemed to shake Kenya more than anything else. He saw her blink hard, fighting tears, focusing on the child to avoid looking at him. The drive to Eastview Medical Center took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Streetlights painted golden strips across the car's interior as they sped through rain-slicked streets, the driver navigating with practiced skill, while Kendrick and Kenya sat in charged silence, separated by 5 years and a child who might be the bridge between them. Kendrick catalogued details with the precision he brought to business negotiations. Kenya's hands trembled slightly as she held her daughter, but her voice stayed calm, fear-controlled but not absent. The worry lines around her eyes suggested this was familiar terror, the kind that came from chronic illness and insufficient resources. Her cheap phone sat on the seat beside her, screen showing a ride-share app with an error message. She'd been trying to get help the only way she could afford, when his car had appeared like divine intervention or cosmic joke. He couldn't tell which. The thought of her standing in the rain, desperately refreshing an app while her daughter couldn't breathe, made something cold and angry settle in his stomach. She'd been alone with this, alone with everything, while he'd built empires and dated suitable women and wondered why nothing ever felt right. Kenya watched Kendrick from the corner of her eye, seeing how 5 years had changed him. The uncertainty of college was gone, replaced by the kind of confidence that came from commanding rooms full of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. His suit was custom-tailored, perfectly cut. The watch on his wrist was understated, but undoubtedly expensive. He looked like he belonged in boardrooms and galas, like he'd grown into exactly what his father had wanted him to become. But when he looked at Azariah, his expression softened in a way that reminded Kenya of the boy who'd brought granola bars and walked her to bus stops and made her believe that love might actually matter more than survival. "Mama, it hurts," Azariah whimpered, pulling Kenya's attention back to what mattered. "I know, baby. We're almost there. Just keep breathing for me, okay? In and out, nice and slow like we practiced." Kendrick leaned forward slightly. "I can call ahead. Let them know we're coming. They'll have a team ready." Kenya wanted to refuse. Accepting more help felt like accepting him back into her life in ways she wasn't prepared for. But Azariah's breathing rattled in her chest, and practicality won over pride. "Thank you." He made the call, his voice calm and authoritative as he explained the situation to whoever answered at the hospital. Kenya heard fragments: 4-year-old female, respiratory distress, history of reactive airway disease, fever, oxygen saturation around 92%. When had he learned that information? She'd only mentioned it once. But Kendrick had always had the kind of mind that catalogued important details, stored them for later use. Apparently her daughter's vital signs qualified as important. Their daughter's vital signs. Because there was no question now, not really. He was doing the math, seeing the resemblance, connecting dots that pointed to only one possible conclusion. Kenya watched him realize it in real time, saw the moment calculation became certainty, saw him glance at Azariah with new understanding, saw questions forming that he was disciplined enough not to ask while their daughter struggled to breathe. Our daughter. The words felt strange even in her mind, a truth she'd hidden for so long it felt foreign to acknowledge even silently. Eastview Medical Center's emergency entrance glowed through the rain like salvation. The car pulled smoothly under the covered drop-off area, and Kendrick was out before it fully stopped, coming around to open Kenya's door before she could reach for the handle. He offered his hand. Kenya hesitated for just a heartbeat. Accepting his help meant accepting him back into her orbit, accepting the conversation that would inevitably follow once Azariah was stable. But her daughter's breathing had deteriorated further during the drive, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, familiar in ways that made her chest ache. For one disorienting second, she was 21 again, feeling the universe shift when he'd first touched her. Then Azariah coughed, and the moment shattered into present urgency. They moved through the automatic doors together, and fluorescent lights assaulted Kenya's eyes after the darkness outside. The antiseptic smell of hospitals filled her nose, familiar and frightening in equal measure. Nurse Jasmine Lee looked up from the triage desk, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the situation. Soaked woman, sick child, respiratory distress visible from across the room, and an expensively dressed man who clearly didn't belong in this emergency room but was present anyway. "How can I help?" Jasmine was already moving from behind her station, fingers reaching for a pediatric pulse oximeter. 4 years old, high fever, respiratory distress with retractions, Kenya said, slipping into the clinical language she'd learned through necessity. History of reactive airway disease. She's been on albuterol at home with no improvement. Her oxygen saturation was 92% 20 minutes ago. Jasmine's eyes flicked briefly to Kendrick, taking in his expensive suit and authoritative presence, then back to Kenya's wet grocery store uniform. The unspoken question, "What's this picture?" remained professional and unasked. "Relationship to the patient?" Jasmine asked, fingers already flying across the computer keyboard, pulling up Azariah's existing file from her previous visits. "I'm her mother," Kenya said. "I'm family," Kendrick added smoothly before Kenya could stop him. Kenya shot him a look half warning, half gratitude. Having someone with his obvious resources and presence might get Azariah seen faster, even if it meant complicating an already impossible situation. She'd deal with the implications later. Right now, her daughter needed help, and if Kendrick's privilege could expedite that, she'd swallow her pride and let him use it. Jasmine didn't question the claim. "Let's get her back immediately. I'm paging Dr. Reyes now." Within minutes they were in a treatment room, and Azariah was surrounded by efficient medical professionals moving with practiced urgency. A pulse oximeter clipped to her tiny finger displayed numbers that made Kenya's heart clench. 87% now, even lower than before, dangerously low for a child her age. An oxygen mask went over Azariah's face, and the little girl's eyes went wide with fear. "Mama?" Her voice was muffled by the mask, small and terrified. "I'm right here, baby." Kenya moved close, taking Azariah's free hand, her own still damp from the rain. "These nice people are helping you breathe better, just like at home but with stronger medicine. Remember how the mask helps, just like we practiced." Dr. Elena Reyes entered, her movements economical and purposeful. She was in her 40s with kind eyes and the kind of competence that came from years in emergency medicine. She listened to Azariah's lungs with a stethoscope, checked the monitors, asked rapid-fire questions that Kenya answered while Kendrick stood against the wall, watching everything with intense focus. Significant wheezing bilaterally, oxygen saturation at 87%, visible retractions, fever of 102.1, Dr. Reyes announced to the nurse, documenting everything. "This is a severe asthma exacerbation, likely triggered by a viral respiratory infection. We need to start continuous albuterol immediately, get a chest X-ray to rule out pneumonia, and consider steroids depending on her response." "Will she need to be admitted?" Kenya's voice went tight with worry, and the unspoken concern about hospital bills she couldn't afford. "Let's see how she responds to treatment first," Dr. Reyes said, her tone reassuring but honest. "But I want to be prepared for admission if her oxygen saturation doesn't improve in the next hour. Sometimes these kids need a little extra time on continuous treatments before they turn the corner." Kenya nodded, trying not to think about what admission would cost, what bills would arrive in 2 weeks that she'd have no way to pay. Right now, Azariah's breathing mattered more than future financial disasters. "Mom, you can stay with her during the treatment," Dr. Reyes said. "Dad," she glanced at Kendrick, making the same assumption Jasmine had. "We'll need you to wait in the family area while we get the chest X-ray. We'll update you as soon as we have results." Neither Kenya nor Kendrick corrected her assumption. Now wasn't the time for complicated explanations about estranged parents and 5-year secrets. "I'll be right outside," Kendrick said, his eyes meeting Kenya's across their daughter's hospital bed. So many things passed unspoken in that look. Questions about the past 5 years, about the child who looked exactly like him, about why Kenya had disappeared without a trace. But also something simpler. A shared focus on the small person struggling to breathe, an unspoken agreement that everything else could wait until she was safe. Kenya nodded, unable to trust her voice. What could she possibly say right now? "Sorry I didn't tell you that you have a daughter. Thanks for the ride that brought us face to face with 5 years of secrets. Please don't ask questions I'm not ready to answer." As the medical team prepared Azariah for her chest X-ray, as nurses attached additional monitors and adjusted oxygen flow, Kenya felt the weight of 5 years of secrets pressing against her chest like a physical force. In the next room, Kendrick was almost certainly doing the math, connecting dots, realizing truths she'd hidden. And once Azariah was stable, once the immediate crisis passed, there would be no more hiding, no more pretending, no more distance between the life she'd built and the truth she'd buried. Her phone buzzed. A notification from the rideshare service apologizing for the delay, saying her driver had finally arrived at her apartment building 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes too late. Wrong car, right person, impossible timing. The universe had a cruel sense of humor, or perhaps a perfect one. 5 years she'd managed to avoid this moment, and it had taken a storm and a sick child and a mistaken car to force the confrontation she'd been dreading. Through the treatment room's window, Kenya could see Kendrick in the family waiting area. He'd removed his jacket, revealing a shirt that probably cost more than her weekly groceries. He sat perfectly still, his face a study in controlled emotion, hands clasped between his knees like he was physically holding himself together. Waiting, thinking, calculating the implications of a 4-year-old girl who had his eyes and his nose and his stubborn chin. Kendrick Vale sat down in a hard plastic chair with rainwater still dripping from his $1,000 suit, and for the first time in 5 years, he let himself wonder out loud. Is that little girl mine? The words hung in the fluorescent-lit waiting room, unanswered but undeniable. The timeline aligned too perfectly to be a coincidence. The resemblance was too strong to be an accident. And Kenya's fear when she'd recognized him suggested secrets too big to hide much longer. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. Inside, another storm was just beginning, one that would force Kenya and Kendrick to confront everything they'd lost, everything they'd hidden, and everything they might still save if they were brave enough to try. The hospital waiting room clock ticked with deliberate cruelty, each second stretching into eternity. Kendrick sat motionless in the plastic chair, his mind racing through calculations he'd been too afraid to make until now. Kenya had disappeared 5 years ago. The child, Azariah, he'd heard Kenya call her, was 4 years old, which meant Kenya had been pregnant when she left, or became pregnant right before. Either way, the timeline pointed to one undeniable truth that was rewriting his entire understanding of the past 5 years. He was a father, and he'd missed everything. He closed his eyes and saw ghosts of moments that had happened without him, Kenya's belly swelling with his child while he nursed his wounded pride and accepted his father's narrative that she'd simply given up. A newborn taking her first breath while he sat in boardrooms, pretending quarterly earnings mattered, first steps, first words, first birthday candles, all celebrated in his absence while he built an empire and wondered why success felt so hollow. The pain was physical, a weight pressing on his chest that had nothing to do with the expensive suit he was still wearing. He'd spent 5 years building Vale Global's reach, while his daughter grew up thinking her father didn't want her. Or worse, not knowing her father existed at all. What had his private investigators said? Kenya had disappeared so thoroughly it was like she'd been erased. Now he understood why. She hadn't been running from heartbreak. She'd been protecting their child from the very world that had pushed her away. I should have fought harder, he whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of who he'd been 5 years ago. I should have torn the city apart looking for you. I should have known you wouldn't just leave without reason. But he'd been young and hurt, and too willing to believe the worst, because believing the worst meant he didn't have to examine his own failures. Evelyn had said Kenya chose to leave, and he'd accepted it because acceptance required nothing from him but moving on. Except Kenya hadn't chosen to leave. She'd been forced out by his father's influence and Evelyn's manipulation, and she'd been carrying his child when she made the impossible decision to disappear. The folder in his jacket pocket suddenly felt heavier. Earlier tonight, before the storm, before Kenya had appeared in his car like an answer to prayers he'd stopped saying, he'd been reviewing foundation proposals. Eastview Community Clinic had been on the list, the same clinic where Azariah was now being treated. He'd been funding his daughter's healthcare without knowing she existed. The irony was almost poetic in its cruelty. An hour later, 63 minutes by the waiting room clock that Kendrick had watched with obsessive focus, Dr. Reyes emerged through the double doors, pulling off her surgical mask. Kendrick was on his feet before she'd fully entered the waiting area, every muscle tense with fear he'd only recently acknowledged. How is she? Stable. We've got her oxygen saturation back up to 97%, which is much better. The continuous albuterol treatment helped significantly, and we've started her on oral steroids to reduce the inflammation in her airways. Relief flooded through him so powerfully his knees almost buckled. What caused this? She has a viral respiratory infection, likely rhinovirus based on symptoms that triggered an acute asthma exacerbation. For children with reactive airway disease, viral infections can escalate very quickly. The fever, the airway inflammation, the reduced oxygen, it all compounds. Dr. Reyes's expression softened. The good news is she responded well to treatment. And the bad news? She'll need to stay overnight for observation. We want to make sure her breathing remains stable as we taper the continuous treatments to her regular medications. Kenya is with her now, and Azariah is resting comfortably. Can I see them? Dr. Reyes studied him for a moment, and Kendrick wondered what she saw. An expensively dressed man claiming to be family, showing up in the middle of a storm, clearly invested, but also clearly unfamiliar with the child's medical history. Let me check with Kenya first. This has been a stressful night for all of you. She disappeared back through the doors, leaving Kendrick alone with his racing thoughts. Kenya could refuse to let him in, could demand he leave, could maintain the walls she'd built 5 years ago, and he'd have to respect that decision, even though every cell in his body screamed to go to that room, to see his daughter, to demand answers to questions he'd waited 5 years to ask. 5 minutes later, the second longest 5 minutes of his life after the hour he'd just endured, Dr. Reyes returned. Kenya says you can come in for a moment. Room 314, but keep it brief. Azariah needs rest, and honestly, so does her mother. The corridor to room 314 stretched endlessly, each step weighted with 5 years of secrets about to be confronted. Kendrick's hand shook slightly as he pushed open the door, unsure what he'd find on the other side. The room was small, dominated by the pediatric bed where Azariah lay sleeping. Oxygen tubing ran to her nose, monitors beeped softly with reassuring rhythm, 4 fluids dripped steadily. She looked tiny in the hospital bed, fragile in a way that made Kendrick's chest ache with protective instinct he'd never known he could feel this intensely. Kenya sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, one hand resting on Azariah's arm like she was anchoring herself to what mattered most. She looked exhausted beyond measure, wet hair, drying in strange patterns, grocery store uniform still damp, eyes red from tears or exhaustion, or both. She looked up when he entered, and the expression on her face was so complex he couldn't begin to decode it. Fear, resignation, defiance, hope, despair, all tangled together in a way that made her look simultaneously strong and shattered. "Thank you for the ride," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. How is she?" "Breathing better." "They said she'll be okay." Kenya's voice cracked on the last word, all the terror she'd been holding at bay finally showing through now that the crisis had passed and Azariah was safe. Kendrick moved closer, carefully, like approaching something precious and fragile. Up close, Azariah's resemblance to him was undeniable and overwhelming. She had his nose, his jawline, his hands, even the way her eyebrows curved matched his exactly. But her mouth was all Kenya, soft, expressive, showing hints of her mother's determined strength even in sleep. "She's beautiful," he said. The words inadequate, but all he could manage was the emotion clogging his throat. "She is. She's brilliant and stubborn, and asks more questions than any 4-year-old should be capable of forming," pride mixed with exhaustion in Kenya's voice. "She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, so she can help other kids who can't breathe well. That's exactly how she says it. Breathe good." Despite everything, Kendrick smiled. Then reality crashed back, and the smile faded. "Kenya." He said her name carefully, giving her space to refuse what he was about to ask. "That little girl, is she mine?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the mechanical beep of monitors and the whisper of oxygen through tubes. Kenya looked at Azariah, then back at Kendrick, and he saw her make the decision to stop hiding. "Yes." The word came out steady, final, like a door closing on 5 years of secrets. She's your daughter. Her full name is Azariah Cole. She's 4 years old. She loves purple crayons and princess stories and asking questions I don't know how to answer. She's brilliant and stubborn and the best thing I've ever done with my life. The confirmation hit Kendrick like a physical force, even though he'd known, had calculated, had seen the evidence written in every line of Azariah's face. Hearing it stated plainly restructured his entire reality in an instant. He had a daughter, a 4-year-old girl who'd spent her entire life without him, a child who'd struggled to breathe while he'd attended business dinners and signed contracts and pretended the emptiness inside him was normal. His breath caught, unsteady. One hand came up to cover his mouth, a physical barrier against the sound threatening to escape. Grief and joy and regret all tangled into something too big for his chest to contain. His eyes burned, vision blurring with tears he hadn't cried since his mother's funeral. "I'm sorry," he managed, though the words were completely inadequate for the magnitude of what he was apologizing for. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. For either of you." He looked at Azariah, really looked at her, and felt something fierce and protective surge through him, a love so immediate and overwhelming it felt like it had always existed, just waiting for him to catch up to what his heart already knew. "She has my hands," he said, a wonder creeping into his voice despite everything. "The same long fingers, and your nose, and your stubborn chin, and your habit of asking why about everything until people want to scream." Kenya's voice held affection despite the tension between them. "She's yours, Kendrick. She's been yours since the moment she was born. You just didn't know it." Kendrick's carefully maintained composure crumbled. He sank into the other visitor chair, legs suddenly unable to support him, hands shaking as he pressed them against his face. 5 years. 5 years of birthdays he hadn't celebrated, of milestones he hadn't witnessed, of a child growing up without knowing her father existed. 5 years of Kenya doing this alone, the sleepless nights, the medical emergencies, the constant fear that came with raising a child with chronic health issues. "Tell me everything," he said when he could speak again. "Please." Her first word, her first steps, what she's afraid of, what makes her happy. "I know I don't deserve to know, but—" "Stop." Kenya's voice was gentle but firm. "Don't make this about what you deserve. That's not productive for anyone, especially not for her." She was right, and the fact that she could still see clearly while he was drowning in emotion reminded him why he'd loved her in the first place. Kenya had always been the practical one, the one who saw what needed to be done and did it regardless of how she felt about it. Her first word was more, Kenya said quietly, looking at Azariah with such love it made Kendrick's chest ache. She was 10 months old, and she wanted more applesauce. She's been demanding more of everything ever since. More stories, more questions, more adventures. She walked at 13 months, ran at 14, and gave me my first grey hair when she climbed onto the kitchen counter at 2. Despite everything, Kendrick found himself smiling through tears. She's afraid of thunderstorms and the dark, but she pretends she's not because she thinks being brave means not being scared. I keep trying to teach her that being brave means being scared and doing it anyway, but she's 4 and stubborn. Kenya's voice softened further. "She makes me happy every single day, even on the days when I'm so exhausted I can barely function. She makes everything worth it. I should have been there, for all of it." "Yes," Kenya agreed simply. "You should have. But you weren't, and we survived. She's healthy and happy and loved, and right now, that's what matters." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out quieter than Kendrick intended. Not accusatory, but genuinely trying to understand. "Why disappear instead of giving me the choice?" "I didn't disappear instead of telling you. I tried to tell you." Kenya's expression was tired, worn down by years of carrying this secret. "I wrote you a letter, a long one explaining everything, the pregnancy, the threats, why I had to leave. I mailed it to your campus mailbox the night before I left the city. I never got any letter." The words felt hollow even as he said them. "I checked that mailbox every day for months hoping to hear from you. There was nothing. Then where did it go?" The question hung between them, and Kendrick's analytical mind clicked through the timeline with growing fury. Evelyn Hart. She was on the university board, had access to student services, and sat on the scholarship committee. "She approached me at the gala," Kenya said, remembering. "Gave me an envelope with opportunities far from here, and strongly suggested I disappear gracefully before your father made my life and my family's lives unbearable. And when you did, she told me you'd left the program voluntarily, that you'd realized the gap between our worlds was too wide to bridge. She made it sound like you'd chosen to walk away." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Evelyn had positioned herself perfectly, close enough to Gregory to know his wishes, close enough to university administration to intercept correspondence, trusted enough by Kendrick that he'd believed her version of events without significant question. "She stole my letter," Kenya said, the realization landing like a punch. "She let you think I abandoned you, let me think you hadn't cared enough to respond to the truth. She protected the company. That's what my father pays her to do, anticipate problems and eliminate them before they become complications that affect the bottom line." Kendrick's voice was bitter. "We were a problem. You, me, a baby that would have complicated the Vale legacy narrative and potentially affected business relationships. My father was cultivating, so she just erased my attempt to tell you the truth, and I was stupid enough to believe her lies because they fit the narrative I'd already convinced myself of, that you'd left because I wasn't worth fighting for." Kenya was quiet for a moment, processing this new understanding of the past 5 years. "We were both manipulated, both lied to, both made decisions based on incomplete information because someone else thought they knew better than we did what our lives should look like." "Your father knew," Kenya said slowly, working through implications. "At the gala, he knew about me, knew enough to have Evelyn threaten my family's livelihoods if I didn't disappear. He's always known more than he lets on. That's how he maintains control. Information asymmetry." Kendrick's hands clenched into fists. He probably instructed Evelyn to monitor the situation, to intervene if necessary to protect company interests. And a pregnant girlfriend from the wrong side of town definitely qualified as something requiring intervention. "You were never just a girlfriend to me. You were everything." The words came out raw, honest in a way Kendrick hadn't allowed himself to be in years, and he destroyed it because you didn't fit into his plans for Vale Global's image. "He destroyed it because I let him," Kenya corrected. "I could have fought, could have shown up at your father's office, demanded to be heard, made a scene big enough that ignoring me would have been impossible. And he would have crushed you, destroyed your mother's employment, your brother's futures, made sure you could never finish your education or build the career you wanted. Maybe. Probably." Kenya looked at Azariah, still sleeping peacefully. "But I didn't even try because I was scared. When you grow up the way I did, you learn that powerful people don't just win arguments. They destroy the people who challenge them. Your father had the resources to make my entire family suffer for the crime of me loving you, so you left to protect them. I left to protect everyone. You included." Kenya's voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. "Because if I'd stayed, you would have had to choose between me and your father's approval, between our baby and the company you'd been raised to lead. And I loved you too much to make you choose, because either choice would have destroyed part of you." "I need you to understand something," Kenya said, straightening in her chair despite her exhaustion. "I'm not blameless in how this turned out. I made choices too, choices that took your agency away, that decided for both of us what our future would look like. You were protecting our child." "I was scared," she interrupted. "Scared of your father's power, scared of losing everything I'd worked for, scared that if I stayed and fought and lost, I'd have nothing left to give our baby. But being scared doesn't make my choices right. It just makes them understandable. Kendrick leaned forward, wanting to understand not just what she'd done, but why she'd felt she had no other option. Tell me what it was like. Those 5 years, raising her alone. Kenya took a breath, organizing years of struggle into words. The first year was survival mode, working multiple jobs, taking care of a newborn, trying to finish my certification online while sleeping 4 hours a night if I was lucky. There were days I didn't know how I'd make it to the next day. You should have let me help. How? You didn't know we existed. That was my choice, remember? She rubbed her face, exhaustion evident. Azariah's first serious breathing episode terrified me. She was 18 months old, couldn't catch her breath, and I was alone at 2 a.m., calling 911 and praying I'd gotten her help soon enough. That's when I learned about reactive airway disease, about managing chronic illness, about being strong enough for both of us even when I wanted to fall apart. I'm so sorry you had to do that alone. I wasn't completely alone. I had Tasha, my friend from work. She babysat, brought us food, forced me to laugh when everything felt impossible. And the clinic, Dr. Patel and the staff at Eastview became our support system. Kenya's expression softened. There's a foundation that funds the clinic's programs, covers medications for families who can't afford them, provides equipment, makes healthcare accessible. Without that assistance, I don't know how I would have managed Azariah's treatments. Kendrick felt his throat tighten, knowing what she didn't, that he'd funded that program, that his foundation, born from guilt and lessons she taught him, had been keeping their daughter healthy without him knowing she existed. The universe has a strange sense of humor, he said quietly. Why? Nothing. Tell me more. About her, about you, about these 5 years I missed. So Kenya told him. About Azariah's obsession with purple, about the time she'd tried to give their neighbor's cat a nebulizer treatment because he was coughing and needed medicine, about starting community college online, about the job at the grocery store that had become a stepping stone to her current position as a medical assistant in training. I'm 6 months away from certification, Kenya said. Then I can apply for positions that pay enough that we won't have to choose between groceries and medication. That was always the goal. Build something stable enough that Azariah never has to worry about money the way I did growing up. Kenya looked away, and he saw shame flash across her face. Nothing yet. She's asked a few times, mostly when she sees other kids with their dads. I told her that her daddy lived far away and couldn't be with us right now, but that he'd want to know her if he could. That was kind of you, kinder than I deserve. It was true. You would have wanted to know her if you'd known she existed. That wasn't in question. Kenya met his eyes again. What was in question was whether you loving her would be enough to protect us from your father's influence. And I didn't trust that it would be. You were right not to trust it, Kendrick admitted, the words bitter but honest. 5 years ago, I wasn't strong enough to stand up to my father effectively. I let him pull me away from you at that gala. I accepted Evelyn's explanation about your disappearance without pushing hard enough for truth. I built the life he wanted me to build instead of fighting for the life I actually wanted. And now I'm vice president of Vale Global. I control my own division, make my own decisions, and I stopped seeking his approval about 3 years ago. Kendrick's voice hardened. If I'd known about you, about Azariah, I would have fought. I would have used every resource at my disposal to find you, to make sure you were safe, to be the father our daughter deserved. You can't know that for certain. You're looking back with the person you are now, not the person you were then. You're right. But I can tell you this, the foundation you mentioned, the one that funds the clinic, I built that. After you left, I channeled everything I felt into creating programs that would help people like you. people my father's world had pushed aside as inconvenient or unsuitable. Kenya's eyes widened. The Vale Global Foundation? That's yours? Technically it's the company's, but I pushed for it. I defend it in every board meeting, and I personally approve every grant. Kendrick's voice softened. I couldn't find you, couldn't fix what I'd broken, but I could try to make the world a little less cruel to people in situations like yours. It was the least I could do. So you've been funding Azariah's healthcare without knowing she was your daughter, apparently. The universe really does have a twisted sense of irony. They sat in silence for a moment, processing years of misunderstanding and manipulation, of paths that had diverged and now intersected in the most unexpected way. I wish you'd trusted me enough to be scared of me, Kendrick said finally, to tell me you were pregnant, to let me decide whether I was brave enough to fight for us instead of making that decision for both of us. I wish I'd been brave enough to give you that choice, Kenya replied. But I was 21 and terrified and convinced that protecting everyone meant taking the decision out of your hands. We can't get those years back. No, we can't. Kenya looked at Azariah, still sleeping peacefully despite the conversation happening around her. But we can decide what happens from here. If you've ever had a relationship ruined by silence, misunderstanding, or other people's interference, tell me in the comments. What would you say if you got one honest conversation back? And if this story is making you think about your own second chances, tap that like button to support Mr. Steele Rich Stories so we can keep bringing you powerful lessons like this. What do you want to happen? Kendrick asked. From here, I mean. With Azariah, with us, with everything. Kenya was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. I want her to grow up knowing she's wanted by both her parents. I want her to understand that love is complicated but real, that family doesn't always look like the pictures in storybooks. I want her to never feel like she was a mistake or a burden or anything less than completely cherished. I can promise you that last part right now. She's not a mistake. She's a miracle I didn't know I needed. Good. Then we agree on the important part. Kenya's voice took on the practical tone Kendrick remembered from their college debates. But we need ground rules, Kendrick. Clear expectations and boundaries that protect her. I'm listening. No matter what happens between us romantically, and I'm not even close to ready to think about that, Azariah comes first. We don't weaponize her against each other. We don't make her choose sides. We present a united front even when we disagree, agreed completely, and we tell her an age-appropriate version of the truth about why you weren't there before. I won't let her grow up thinking you abandoned us, but I also won't lie and say circumstances were different than they were. How do we explain that to a 4-year-old? Kendrick asked, genuinely uncertain. We say that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other grown-ups make those mistakes worse by not being honest. We tell her that her daddy didn't know about her, but would have loved her from the first second if he had. Kenya's voice roughened with emotion. We tell her that we're both so happy we found each other now, even if the journey was harder and longer than it should have been. That's perfect. And I want... Kendrick stopped, making sure he had the right words. I want to be her father. Not a weekend visitor she has to accommodate, not a stranger who sends gifts to assuage guilt. Her actual father, present and involved and there when she wakes up scared at night. That's a big commitment for someone you met 2 hours ago. I've been her father since she was conceived. I just didn't know it. He looked at Azariah with an expression of fierce determination. I know nothing about being a parent. I'll make mistakes, I'll need your guidance, I'll probably do 100 things wrong, but I'm committed to learning, to showing up, to being worthy of her. Kenya studied him for a long moment, and Kendrick felt like he was being assessed the way she used to assess his arguments in ethics class, looking for holes in logic, testing sincerity against reality. Okay, she said finally. We try. We figure out custody arrangements, we get legal agreements in place to protect everyone, and we learn how to co-parent a 4-year-old with health issues who asks more questions than most adults can answer. I'll hire the best family law attorney. We'll find a mediator who specializes in collaborative parenting agreements, Kenya corrected. Someone neutral who can help us navigate this without it becoming adversarial. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm used to solving problems by throwing resources at them. I know. But this isn't a problem to be solved. It's a situation to be navigated carefully because there's a little girl at the center of it who deserves better than parents fighting over her. Kendrick nodded, humbled by Kenya's clarity even in exhaustion. She'd had 5 years to think about what Azariah needed. He was just catching up to a reality she'd been living with since the pregnancy test turned positive. As if summoned by the conversation about her, Azariah stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, still hazy from medication and exhaustion. She looked at the monitors, the 4 in her hand, the oxygen tubing in her nose, then at her mother. "Mommy? Right here, baby. How do you feel? Tired?" "My chest doesn't hurt anymore, though." Azariah's voice was stronger than it had been in the car, her breathing easier. Then her eyes found Kendrick, and curiosity replaced confusion. Who is he? Kenya looked at Kendrick, a question in her eyes. How much? How fast? How do we begin to explain this? He nodded slightly, trusting her judgment. "This is Kendrick," Kenya said carefully, choosing words that were true but gentle. "He's someone very special who wants to be part of our lives from now on." Azariah studied him with the solemn assessment only children can manage, taking in his expensive clothes and kind eyes, and the way he was looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. "Are you Mommy's friend?" "I'd like to be your friend too, if that's okay with you," Kendrick said, his voice gentle. "You look fancy, like the people on TV who live in big houses." Kendrick laughed, surprised and delighted by her directness. "I suppose I am kind of fancy, but fancy people can still be good friends. Do you like ice cream?" "I love ice cream. What kind?" "Chocolate. But I've never tried rainbow sherbet mixed with chocolate and strawberry. Is that good?" Azariah's face lit up. "It's the best. Mommy says it's too much sugar, but she always lets me have it when I'm sick. Then we can be friends." Azariah's logic was absolute, the verdict final. "Can we get ice cream when I leave the hospital?" Kendrick looked at Kenya, who nodded permission after a moment's hesitation. He turned back to Azariah. His daughter, these words still felt surreal, and smiled. "Yes, we can get ice cream. Any flavor you want, any time you want. I promise." It was a small promise, a child-level commitment about frozen desserts. But the weight of it settled around Kendrick's heart like an oath. He would keep this promise, and every promise that came after. He would be the father Azariah deserved, even if he had to learn how to do it, while already 4 years behind. "I want rainbow sherbet and chocolate and strawberry all mixed together," Azariah said seriously, "and maybe vanilla too." "Is that too many flavors?" "There's no such thing as too many flavors when it comes to ice cream," Kendrick assured her. "That's exactly what you'll get. I promise." Azariah's eyes were already drifting closed again, exhausted from the night's crisis and the medications making her drowsy. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Kendrick looked at Kenya, asking permission with his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "If your mom says it's okay, I'll be here every time you wake up from now on." "Okay. That's good." Azariah's words were slurring with sleep. "I like you. You're nice." Within moments she was asleep again, breathing easy now, unaware that the world had shifted on its axis tonight, unaware that the stranger she'd just befriended was her father, unaware that her mother and that stranger were navigating the most complicated conversation of their lives while she slept. Kenya and Kendrick sat in silence, watching their daughter sleep, both thinking the same thing. This was just the beginning. The hard conversations, the complicated logistics, the inevitable conflicts with Gregory, the questions from Azariah as she got older, all of that waited in the days ahead. But for now, in this small hospital room, a family was beginning to form from the broken pieces of what had been stolen from them 5 years ago. Not perfect, not simple, but possible. And possibly more than either of them had dared hope for when the storm had brought them together again. Morning light filtered through the hospital room's blinds, casting soft stripes across Azariah's bed. She was awake, sitting up, the oxygen tubes removed, looking infinitely better than she had 12 hours ago. Color had returned to her cheeks, her breathing was easy and natural, and she was engaged in an animated conversation with a nurse about the cartoon characters on her hospital gown. Kendrick had stayed all night in the uncomfortable visitor chair, refusing Kenya's suggestion that he go home and rest. His suit was wrinkled beyond repair, his tie discarded hours ago, his usually immaculate appearance thoroughly disheveled. But he hadn't been able to leave, couldn't tear himself away from this room where his daughter, was recovering from a crisis he'd helped get her through. Kenya had dozed fitfully in the other chair, waking every hour to check Azariah's monitors, to listen to her breathing, to reassure herself that the crisis had truly passed. She looked exhausted, her grocery store uniform still damp in places, dark circles under her eyes, speaking to years of managing these situations alone. Dr. Meera Patel arrived with discharge papers and follow-up instructions, stopping short when she saw the man in the expensive suit sitting beside Kenya. "Mr. Vale?" Her surprise was evident, recognition flashing across her face. She'd seen his name on Foundation grant documents and had read about him in business journals that featured major donors. "I didn't realize you knew the Coleman family." "Dr. Patel, this is Azariah's father," Kenya said quietly, watching understanding dawn on the doctor's face. "I see." Dr. Patel's professionalism covered her shock admirably. "Well, Azariah's doing much better. Her chest x-ray showed a viral pneumonia that we caught early, and her lung function has improved significantly overnight." "What's the long-term outlook?" Kendrick asked, leaning forward with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. "She has moderate persistent asthma, which means she'll need daily preventive medication and careful management of triggers. With proper treatment and monitoring, most children with asthma live completely normal lives. The key is consistency with medications, regular checkups, and catching exacerbations early before they become critical." Dr. Patel smiled at Azariah, who was now coloring on the back of a nurse's clipboard. "This brave girl already knows her routine better than some of my adult patients. She understands her medications, recognizes when she's having trouble breathing, and advocates for herself. Kenya has done an excellent job teaching her to manage her condition. Because Mommy's the best," Azariah announced proudly. "She always knows how to make me feel better." Kenya blinked against sudden tears, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion and the surreal reality of Kendrick sitting beside her, receiving information about their daughter's chronic illness. Kendrick watched the interaction with new understanding. Kenya had been doing this alone for 4 years, learning medical terminology, managing medications, staying calm during emergencies, teaching their daughter to advocate for her own health. The weight of that solitary responsibility hit him again, a fresh wave of regret for everything she'd carried without him. "We're lucky to have the Foundation grants," Dr. Patel mentioned offhandedly. "They cover Azariah's medications through our assistance program, which makes consistent treatment possible for families like yours." Kendrick and Kenya exchanged a look across Azariah's bed, the bitter irony of him funding his own daughter's healthcare without knowing she existed, of the universe weaving their lives together with invisible threads neither had been able to see. After Dr. Patel left with discharge instructions and follow-up appointment schedules, Kenya and Kendrick stepped into the hallway while a nurse helped Azariah change out of the hospital gown, giving themselves space to have the necessary conversation. "I want to cover all of her medical expenses," Kendrick said without preamble. "All of them, past, present, future. Hospital bills, medications, specialist appointments, everything she needs." Kenya's jaw tightened, the familiar pride Kendrick remembered rising immediately. "I've been managing." "I know you have, but you shouldn't have to choose between her health and your rent, Kenya. This isn't charity or rescue. This is me taking responsibility for my daughter. Our daughter. I don't want to be saved, Kendrick. I want a partner, not a benefactor with a checkbook who thinks money solves everything. Then tell me what partnership looks like to you." He kept his voice level, non-confrontational. "Because I'm starting from zero here. I don't know the first thing about being a parent, about her routines, about what she needs. I need your guidance." Kenya took a breath, organizing her thoughts the way she used to before making arguments in ethics class. "We need legal agreements, official custody arrangements, financial responsibilities clearly outlined, decision-making protocols established. I need to know this isn't going to disappear when the novelty wears off, or your father applies pressure again. My father doesn't control my life anymore. Words are easy, Kendrick. Consistency is hard. Azariah needs reliability, not grand gestures followed by absence when corporate demands take precedence." "You're right." He pulled out his phone. "I have a family law attorney I trust, actually someone who specializes in collaborative parenting agreements rather than adversarial divorce proceedings. Would you be willing to meet with her? We can hash out something that protects everyone and makes expectations crystal clear." Kenya studied him for a long moment, looking for signs of the boy who'd let his father pull him away at that gala. But 5 years had changed him. There was steel in his voice now, a certainty that came from having fought battles and won enough of them to know his own strength. "Okay. We meet with the attorney, we establish formal agreements, we do this properly. And the medical bills from last night, the hospital stay, will be handled through your foundation's assistance program like they always are," Kenya said firmly. "I'm not taking direct charity from you, Kendrick, but if you want to contribute to Azariah's welfare through legal child support arrangements we establish with the attorney, that's different. That's partnership. Fair enough. What about housing? Are you and Azariah safe where you're living? Do you have what you need?" Kenya's expression flickered, pride warring with practicality. "We have a one-bedroom apartment. It's small, the pipes clang, and we share the bedroom, but it's clean, it's safe, and it's ours. I won't move into some penthouse and let Azariah grow up thinking money solves everything. I'm not suggesting a penthouse, but maybe something with 2 bedrooms, a place where Azariah doesn't have to watch you study at midnight because there's nowhere else to do it." Kendrick's voice was gentle. "Let me help make your lives easier, Kenya. Not because you need saving, but because we're in this together now." She was quiet, wrestling with the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain against the reality that accepting help might actually be better for Azariah. "We compromise," she said finally. "You don't swoop in and transform our lives overnight, but we can look at better housing options together, make decisions together, figure out what works for Azariah's needs and my ability to accept help without feeling like I'm losing myself in the process. Like actual co-parents, exactly like actual co-parents. For the first time since they'd crashed back into each other's lives, something like a real smile crossed Kenya's face. "This is going to be complicated, isn't it?" "Probably the most complicated thing either of us has ever done," Kendrick agreed. "But she's worth it." They both looked through the window into Azariah's room, where she was showing the nurse her coloring, chattering excitedly about the purple princess she'd drawn. "Yes," Kenya said softly. "She's worth everything." The confrontation with Gregory Vale happened 2 days later in his father's corner office, 40 stories above the city. Kendrick didn't schedule the meeting. He simply walked in during a strategy session with the executive team and asked everyone else to leave. "I have a daughter," he said without preamble, closing the door behind him. "Her name is Azariah. She's 4 years old, she has asthma, and I've missed every single day of her life because your COO intercepted a letter telling me Kenya was pregnant." Gregory's expression barely shifted, revealing nothing. Evelyn was protecting company interests. Evelyn was playing God with other people's lives. And you created an environment where she thought that was not only acceptable but expected. Kendrick's voice stayed level, controlled, but there was steel underneath. "I'm done letting fear of image or stock prices dictate my personal choices. I'm going to be Azariah's father, publicly and completely. If that affects partnership deals or board confidence, we'll handle it. But I will not sacrifice my child for quarterly earnings." The battle that followed wasn't dramatic. Gregory Vale didn't yell or threaten. He was too sophisticated for that. Instead, he deployed logic, referenced fiduciary responsibilities, and mentioned the instability that personal scandals could create in investor confidence. But Kendrick had spent 5 years learning to counter every argument his father made. For every concern about company image, he had data about consumer preferences for authentic corporate leadership. For every worry about stock volatility, he had examples of companies that had weathered far worse personal revelations and emerged stronger. "The world has changed," Kendrick said. "Consumers, investors, partners, they value authenticity now. A CEO with a complicated family situation he's handling responsibly is more relatable than a perfect image that's obviously manufactured. You're gambling with Vale Global's reputation. No, I'm refusing to gamble with my daughter's well-being for the sake of that reputation. There's a difference." Over the following weeks, Kendrick systematically dismantled the structures that had allowed such interference. Evelyn Hart was offered early retirement with a clear message that declining would mean exposure of her actions to the board. She took the retirement package, signed the non-disclosure agreement, and disappeared from Vale Global with her reputation intact, but her power eliminated. Company policies were rewritten to explicitly prohibit management from interfering in employees' personal relationships. Ethics training was expanded to include case studies about overreach and appropriate boundaries. The message was clear: Vale Global would no longer sacrifice individual lives for corporate convenience. Most importantly, Kendrick stopped seeking Gregory's approval. The change was subtle but fundamental. He made decisions and informed his father rather than asking permission. He showed up at board meetings with Azariah's picture on his phone background and dared anyone to comment negatively. The sky didn't fall. Stock prices remained stable. If anything, the business press coverage was sympathetic. A young executive discovering he had a daughter and stepping up to his responsibilities played well in an era that valued work-life balance and family commitment. Gregory never apologized, never acknowledged that his approach had been wrong, but he stopped openly opposing Kendrick's choices, and in the Vale family dynamic, that was as close to acceptance as anyone could hope for. He bought her a $400 teddy bear, Kenya told Tasha over coffee at their usual cafe. "Who spends that much on a stuffed animal?" "Someone trying to make up for lost time," Tasha replied, stirring her latte with a knowing look. "The question is, are you going to hold every expensive gift against him? Or are you going to accept that his love language might include ridiculous teddy bears?" It's not about the bear. It's about control. You've been in control for 4 years, making every decision, carrying every burden. Now someone wants to share that load. And it's terrifying because what if he leaves? What if Azariah gets attached and he decides this is too hard? Kenya stared into her coffee, hating that Tasha was right. What if he hurts her? What if she builds her whole world around having a father, and then he gets bored or his next girlfriend doesn't want to deal with someone else's kid? What if he doesn't? Tasha challenged gently. Kenya, you don't have to let him back into your heart to let him into his daughter's life. But you also don't have to punish yourself forever for choices you made trying to survive. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and just see what happens. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You've just been too stubborn to listen. Tasha's expression softened. He's been showing up, right? To every doctor's appointment, every promised ice cream trip, every bedtime story over video chat when he can't be there in person. Yes, Kenya admitted. He's been consistent. Asks questions, takes notes, wants to learn her routines and preferences. Last week he spent 2 hours learning how to work her nebulizer properly. And how does Azariah respond to him? A small smile crossed Kenya's face despite her reservations. She loves him, asks when he's coming over, wants to show him everything she draws, tells everyone at daycare about her dad who knows all about computers and builds things that help people. Then maybe trust that. Trust what you're seeing instead of what you're afraid might happen. Kenya knew Tasha was right, but knowing and doing were different things. Trusting Kendrick with Azariah's heart meant risking that heart in ways that terrified her. But watching them together, seeing Azariah light up when he arrived, seeing Kendrick's patience when she asked the same question 17 times in a row, seeing both of them work to build something neither had known they were missing, made the risk feel worthwhile. I'm trying, Kenya said finally. It's just hard to let go when being in control has been my survival mechanism for so long. I know. But you're not alone anymore. That's scary, but it's also kind of beautiful if you let it be. 3 months transformed their awkward co-parenting attempts into something resembling a functional routine. Kendrick learned Azariah's medication schedule by heart, could prepare her nebulizer treatment in his sleep, knew exactly which stories she wanted to read at bedtime and which ones she'd outgrown. Tuesday afternoons became their standing routine. Kendrick picked Azariah up from daycare and took her to her pulmonology appointments, giving Kenya time to attend her own classes without scrambling to rearrange work schedules. The first few appointments, Kenya had insisted on coming too, unable to fully trust that Kendrick would ask the right questions or remember important details. By the third appointment, she'd relaxed enough to let him handle it alone. He sent her detailed summaries afterward, including questions to follow up with Dr. Patel about, demonstrating that he took Azariah's health as seriously as she did. Kenya had completed her medical assistant certification, aided by the fact that child support from Kendrick meant she could reduce her work hours and focus on studying. She'd bristled at accepting the help initially, pride warring with practicality. But Tasha had pointed out that letting Azariah's father contribute financially wasn't a weakness. It was allowing him to fulfill his responsibilities so Kenya could build a better future for all of them. The new apartment helped too. Not a penthouse, not anything ostentatious, but a 2-bedroom place in a safer neighborhood with a park nearby. Azariah had her own room, painted purple at her insistence, filled with books and art supplies and the gradually accumulating gifts from a father making up for lost time. One Thursday, Azariah convinced Kendrick to bring her to his office. Board members emerging from a meeting stopped short at the sight of the CEO's daughter sitting at his desk, crayons spread across quarterly reports, coloring princesses on the back of acquisition proposals. Daddy says I can use any color I want because art doesn't have rules, Azariah announced to a group of executives who looked like they'd never seen a child in the Vale Global building before. That's lovely, someone managed. Kendrick just smiled, unbothered by the breach of corporate decorum. Some things mattered more than maintaining the image of untouchable professionalism. Some things, like his daughter's belief that she was welcome in every part of his life, mattered more than anything his father's generation valued. The park was unremarkable, just grass and trees and a playground where Azariah shrieked with joy on the swings. Kenya and Kendrick sat on a blanket watching her play, the remains of their simple picnic spread between them. These Saturday afternoons had become routine over the past month, co-parenting time that felt less awkward with each passing week. She asked me yesterday if you were going to be her real daddy or just her sometimes daddy, Kendrick said, peeling an orange with more focus than the task required. What did you tell her? That I'm her daddy, even when I'm not physically there, that she can call me any time, that I'll be at every birthday and doctor's appointment and school play from now until forever. He looked at Kenya. That's a big promise for someone who's only known her for 3 months. It's the only promise that matters, Kenya said softly. And you've been keeping it so far. So far is easy. It's 50 years from now that concerns me. Will I still be showing up with the same consistency? Will I still make her feel like the center of my universe when work demands escalate or life gets complicated? That's what parenting is. Showing up consistently even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Kenya pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. You're doing better than I expected, if I'm being honest. What did you expect? I don't know. Initial enthusiasm followed by gradual withdrawal as the reality set in. Grand gestures instead of daily presence. Your father convinced you to minimize involvement to protect the company's image. She shrugged. I'm pleasantly surprised to be wrong. Azariah ran over, demanding they watch her go down the slide, and they both dutifully applauded her accomplishment. When she ran back to play, Kenya found herself laughing at something Kendrick said about the physics of playground equipment, and the sound surprised her. Genuine, unguarded laughter that she hadn't allowed herself around him in years. He looked at her then, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not entitlement, not expectation, just quiet gratitude that he was allowed to be here at all. I signed us up for Keo parenting counseling, Kenya said, breaking the moment before it could become too weighted. Tasha found someone who specializes in non-traditional family structures. The first session is next Tuesday. That's good. We could probably use guidance on navigating this. Kendrick hesitated. It's not couples therapy. No, we're not a couple. We're two people trying to raise a daughter together. Kenya looked at him directly. But maybe someday, if we both wanted to explore whether there's still something beyond co-parenting. One step at a time, Kendrick finished gently. One step at a time, Kenya agreed. It wasn't a declaration of renewed romance. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. But it was an opening, a crack in the walls they'd both built, an acknowledgement that the feelings that had drawn them together years ago hadn't completely disappeared, despite everything that had tried to destroy them. For now, that possibility was enough. They had time, years of Azariah's childhood stretching ahead, years of learning to trust each other again, years to see if what they'd lost could be rebuilt into something even stronger. Don't let powerful people write your story for you. Kenya and Kendrick learned this lesson the hardest way possible, when you give others control over your narrative. When you let fear of consequences silence truth, you lose years you can't reclaim. Speak your truth, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid, because the cost of silence is always higher than the risk of honesty. Silence and assumptions destroyed what love had built. A single intercepted letter, unchallenged assumptions about why someone left, pride masquerading as protection. These things stole 5 years from all three of them. Communication isn't just important, it's essential. Tell the truth early, even when the consequences feel terrifying, because the alternative is living with what-ifs that haunt you for years. Second chances aren't guaranteed, but when life hands you one, meet it with honesty and humility. Kendrick could have demanded immediate custody, wielded his wealth like a weapon, punished Kenya for the years he'd lost. Kenya could have held resentment like armor, made his access to Azariah contingent on him earning forgiveness. Instead, they chose the harder path, patience, compromise, putting their daughter's needs above their own wounded pride. Money and status can't protect you from regret. Gregory Vale's billions couldn't buy back the years Kendrick lost with his daughter. Power couldn't erase the damage done by interference in lives that should have been left to make their own choices. But resources used with wisdom can repair what fear once broke, funding clinics, supporting single parents, creating systems that protect rather than punish the vulnerable. Family isn't defined by how it starts, but by the daily choice to show up. Kendrick and Kenya would never have the traditional family structure, would never get back the years they lost. But they could choose every single day to be present for Azariah, to work together despite their complicated history, to build something real from broken pieces. That choice, the daily decision to show up with consistency and love, matters more than perfect beginnings or unblemished pasts. It's the foundation everything else is built on. If this story of Kenya Cole, Kendrick Vale and little Azariah touched you, tell me in the comments what lesson you're taking away. Is it about communication, courage or forgiveness? Is there a relationship in your life that needs honest conversation instead of continued silence? Is there someone you need to tell the truth to, even though it terrifies you? If there's someone you need to talk to, don't wait 5 years in a hospital room. Don't wait for a crisis to force the truth out of hiding. Pick up the phone, send the message, have the conversation that scares you, because the stories we tell ourselves about why we can't speak up are always more comfortable than they are true. Life has a way of forcing confrontations we've been avoiding, but you can choose to have them on your terms, with honesty and courage, before circumstances make the choice for you in the worst possible moment. And if you want more deep emotional stories that entertain your heart and educate your soul, hit like, subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories, and most importantly, share this video with one friend or family member who needs a reminder that their story can still be rewritten. No matter how much time has passed, no matter how complicated the situation, it's never too late to choose honesty over fear, connection over pride, and love over the comfortable lies we tell ourselves to avoid getting hurt. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for letting these stories matter to you. And remember, your life is still being written. Make sure you're holding the pen, not handing it to people who don't understand your story or care about your ending. Be brave, tell the truth, show up consistently, choose love even when it's complicated, especially when it's complicated, because years from now, you won't regret the risks you took for connection. You'll only regret the chances you were too afraid to take. The photographer counted down, 3, 2, 1, smile, and captured the moment, Kenya, Kendrick, and Azariah in the park where they'd had that first tentative picnic months ago. Azariah was in the middle, holding both their hands, her smile showing the gap where another tooth had fallen out last week. It wasn't a perfect family portrait. Kenya and Kendrick weren't married, weren't even officially dating, though the counseling sessions had evolved into coffee afterward, where they talked about more than just Azariah. But they were family in the ways that mattered, committed to their daughter, learning to trust each other again, building something real from the wreckage of what had been stolen from them. Azariah didn't fully understand the complicated history between her parents. She just knew that she had a mama who loved her fiercely and a daddy who showed up for every promise, and that was enough for now. The harder conversations would come later, when she was old enough to understand that love sometimes meant difficult choices, that good people sometimes made mistakes, that family could look different than storybooks suggested and still be whole. For now, she had ice cream dates with her father, bedtime stories from both parents, and the security of knowing she was wanted by everyone who mattered. Kenya had finished her certification and accepted a position at a family practice clinic, not Eastview, but one across town that paid better and had reasonable hours. She was rebuilding the life she'd put on hold, this time with support instead of doing it all alone. Kendrick had restructured his schedule at Vale Global, establishing boundaries his father didn't approve of but couldn't argue with given the division's continued success. Tuesday afternoons were sacred. No meetings, no calls, just time with Azariah. His assistant knew that anything involving his daughter took immediate priority over everything else. They were figuring it out, day by day, mistake by mistake, conversation by conversation. It wasn't easy. So parenting never was, especially with their history. But they were trying, and trying mattered more than perfection. The photographer showed them the picture, and all three leaned in to look. "We look happy," Azariah observed. "We are happy," Kenya confirmed, "even though you and Daddy don't live together, especially because we're figuring out how to make everyone happy while respecting what each person needs," Kendrick explained. "That's harder than just living together would be, but it's more honest." Azariah considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Okay, can we get ice cream now?" They laughed, Kenya and Kendrick together, the sound rusty but real, and headed toward the ice cream shop where Azariah would order her signature combination of flavors that shouldn't work together but somehow did. Just like their family, complicated, unconventional, built from broken pieces and second chances and the stubborn refusal to let other people's interference define their story. Not perfect, but real, and real was exactly what they needed.